Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Brewing Nightmares at the Java Junction. The bell above the door chimed an unsettling tune as I stepped into the dimly lit coffee shop, its warmth a stark contrast to the chill of the early morning outside. It was a modest place, sandwiched between a laundromat and a thrift store, its brick facade weathered and unassuming. A place where whispers and laughter mingled with the rich scent of brewing coffee. I sought solace in the familiar routine of my daily visits. The aroma was a balm for my frayed nerves. Yet, on this particular morning, something was off. The usual hum of conversation was muted, and the few patrons scattered around the room huddled over their drinks, eyes cast downward as if something heavy pressed upon their shoulders. I shrugged off the discomfort, a trick of my imagination, I reasoned. "Morning, Anna," greeted Martha, the barista with bright blue hair, her voice a soothing balm that almost drowned out the unease wrapping around me. Her smile, though strained, was genuine. She had always been a beacon of warmth in this cold world, and I appreciated her friendly demeanor. "Just a regular coffee, please," I replied, forcing a smile in return. As I waited, I glanced around. A couple sat at the corner table, their fingers entwined but their gazes distant. An older man sat alone by the window, his brow furrowed in thought, occasionally glancing at the door as if expecting someone. The tension in the room coiled tighter, suffocating. Martha handed me my drink, and I took a seat by the window, the sun peeking through the clouds, casting an eerie glow on the otherwise dreary street. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, drawing in the rich aroma, but there was an edge to it, something metallic that clawed at my senses. I pushed the thought aside and took a sip, savoring the comforting bitterness. Minutes passed, the shop seemingly stuck in a time warp. The door swung open again, a gust of wind trailing in behind a tall figure. He was cloaked in a long, dark overcoat, his face obscured by a white-brimmed hat. The atmosphere shifted, the chime of the bell echoed louder, as if announcing an omen. I watched as he scanned the room, his eyes lingering on each patron, his scrutiny unsettling. I shifted in my seat, feeling exposed beneath his gaze. He approached the counter, exchanged a few hushed words with Martha, who nodded nervously. I couldn't catch the conversation, but the tension was palpable. The man turned, and for a fleeting moment, our eyes met. A shiver ran down my spine. His eyes were dark pools, devoid of warmth, yet there was something familiar about him. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen him somewhere before, though I couldn't place where. He took a seat at the table opposite mine, folding his hands on the surface, and stared out the window. I tried to return to my coffee, but my curiosity got the better of me. The way he sat there, rigid, as if waiting for something or someone, was unnerving. I glanced around the room. The couple had fallen silent, their fingers now pulled back as they watched the man with narrowed eyes. Something was wrong with the shop today. The air felt weighted, charged with an undercurrent of dread. I took another sip of coffee, but the metallic taste lingered, like blood on my tongue. I tried to shake off the sensation. It was just coffee, I told myself. Just coffee. The door swung open once again, and a figure stepped inside, pulling the cold air with them. My heart sank as I recognized her, Rachel, my friend from the neighborhood. But she looked different, her face pale and drawn, eyes wide like saucers. She hesitated at the threshold, then spotted me and hurried over. "Anna." "I'm glad you're here," she whispered, glancing back at the door, as if expecting it to close behind her. "I need to tell you something." I motioned for her to sit, my pulse quickening. "What's wrong?" She leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "There's something strange happening in this place." I swear I saw someone watching us last week. I thought it was just my imagination, but now her voice trailed off, and I noticed her hands trembling. Watching us. I pressed, suddenly feeling the weight of her fear seep into me. What do you mean? Rachel took a deep breath, her gaze darting towards the man in the dark coat. That man, she whispered. I saw him at the park. He was just standing there, staring. I thought he was harmless, but when I turned to leave, he followed me. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the hairs on my arms standing at attention. Are you sure it was him? I don't know, she admitted, her voice trembling. But the way he looked at me, there was something wrong. Something hungry. The couple at the corner table stood, their chairs scraping against the floor with an ear-splitting screech. They exchanged hurried words, their faces drawn tight with fear. I felt my breath hitch as the door swung open for the third time, and the cold wind poured in, carrying with it a sense of impending doom. Anna? Rachel's voice broke through my thoughts, her eyes wide with terror. We need to leave. Now! I nodded, the urgency of her tone snapping me back to reality. We stood, my coffee forgotten as I cast one last glance at the man. He was no longer staring out the window, his gaze was locked on us, an unyielding stare that sent chills racing down my spine. Before we could reach the door, the bell above it jingled again. Another figure entered, and my heart sank. The shop felt alive with an unseen presence, a gathering of shadows, and I knew in that moment that my safe haven had transformed into something monstrous. And then, the lights flickered. The morning after I stumbled into the coffee shop, the sun shone like a spotlight on the cracked sidewalk, yet the warmth outside felt distant, as if the world had muted its colors just for me. I had tossed and turned all night, images of the barista's haunted gaze invading my restless mind. The lingering scent of burnt coffee hung in the air even as I washed my face, struggling to shake off the dread that clung to me like a second skin. I had to return to the shop. Rationality battled with an inexplicable compulsion, a whispering urgency that urged me to seek answers. So I dressed, deciding it was better to confront the source of my anxiety than to let it fester in the corners of my thoughts. The bell above the door jingled as I entered the shop once more. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the temperature drop, the air thick with a heaviness that pressed against my chest. The glare of the overhead lights was harsh, illuminating the chipped tables and mismatched chairs that bore witness to countless conversations and secrets, while casting elongated shadows that danced across the floor. At first, I saw only a few regulars sitting at their usual spots, their fingers curled around steaming cups of coffee, faces buried in newspapers or the glow of their phones. But there was an unsettling stillness in the air, a tension that made the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. My stomach churned uneasily as I made my way to the counter, where the barista Mara stood, her expression as blank as the white walls behind her. "Good morning," I managed, forcing a casualness I didn't feel. She looked up, eyes shadowed and sunken. "What can I get for you?" Her voice was flat, devoid of the warmth that I'd imagined would greet me. "I'll take a black coffee, please." I fidgeted under her stare, noting how her hands trembled ever so slightly as she reached for the coffee pot. As the dark liquid filled my cup, I glanced around the shop, catching fleeting glimpses of the other patrons. They were all watching, not openly, but their eyes flickered towards me as though I were an intruder, an interloper in their mundane rituals. I felt exposed, momentarily questioning the very reality of the place. Mara slid the cup toward me, her gaze unyielding. There was something wrong, something deeper than just the atmosphere. My thoughts flickered to the odd sound I had heard the previous day, the muffled whispers that had slithered through the walls. "Is everything all right?" I asked, trying to mask my concern with a casual tone. Her response was a mere nod, but a flicker of fear danced behind her eyes. I knew that look, I had seen it too many times before. It was the kind of fear that gnawed at a person's sanity, a silent scream echoing in the depths of their heart. As I took a seat by the window, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I sipped my coffee, its bitter warmth grounding me, but every gulp felt like swallowing stones. The other patrons had returned to their coffee and phones, but the tension in the air persisted like static electricity, waiting to snap. Mara busied herself at the counter, her movements mechanical. I noticed the way her fingers twitched, the way she cast furtive glances toward the back of the shop as if expecting something or someone to emerge from the shadows. The door swung open, and a man stepped inside, his presence commanding immediate attention. He was tall, dressed in a long coat that seemed to absorb the light around him, his hair dark and slicked back. As he approached the counter, I felt a chill race down my spine. Mara tensed, her breath hitching as he leaned in, murmuring something I couldn't hear. I watched as his lips curled into a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those were the eyes of a predator. I leaned forward, straining to catch the conversation, but the shop around me began to fade into a blur. There was a heaviness in the air that wrapped around me, stealing my breath. The man's voice was low and smooth, as if he were weaving a spell. Whatever he said made Mara pale, and she nodded jerkily, glancing over her shoulder at the back of the shop. My heart raced as I stood up, unable to absorb the dread that enveloped me. I needed to leave, but my feet felt glued to the floor, a voyeur trapped in a moment I couldn't comprehend. The man turned, his gaze locking onto mine. A wave of unease washed over me, and I felt exposed under the weight of his scrutiny. With an effort, I tore my eyes away and walked towards the door, but as I did, I heard Mara's voice, strained and panicked. "I can't do that. Not again." The words were raw, laced with desperation. I paused, uncertainty coursing through me. The man's smile widened, a predator savoring the cornered prey. I turned to see Mara's face, a mask of fear and resolve, and the realization hit me like a slap. There was something dark, something sinister happening within these walls. Before I could think, I pushed the door open and stepped outside, the bell above jarring me like a wake-up call. The sunlight enveloped me, but its warmth felt foreign against the chill that clung to my bones. I didn't stop to collect my thoughts. I walked, each step taking me further from the shadow of the coffee shop, yet I couldn't shake the sense that whatever darkness inhabited that place had followed me into the open air, lingering just out of sight, waiting for me to return. I settled into my usual corner of the coffee shop, the familiar scent of roasted beans mixed with the sweetness of pastries barely masking the unsettling memories of the past few days. The shop had seemed like a refuge, a place where the mundane rituals of life could dull the edges of my anxiety. But after the events of the previous week, I was beginning to see the place through a different lens, one marred by shadows and unsettling whispers. As I wrapped my fingers around the warm cup, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The usual chatter of my fellow patrons felt muffled, drowned by the steady drip of the coffee machine. It was a Wednesday, typically the slowest day, yet the shop was packed with faces I didn't recognize. They huddled in corners, their conversations hushed, as if sharing secrets too precious for the air. I tried to focus on my work, but the buzz of their murmurs wormed its way into my thoughts, stirring unease in my stomach. I glanced up occasionally, stealing glances at the strangers. It felt as if they were watching me, their eyes flickering away whenever mine met theirs. I knew it was irrational. They were just people, lost in their own worlds. But the sense of being scrutinized gnawed at me. I shook my head, trying to dispel the apprehension, refocusing on the screen in front of me. Words danced across the page, but they offered no comfort. The story I was crafting felt thin, just like the barrier between my sanity and the unsettling reality around me. It was during a particularly tense moment, while I waited for my next cup, that I first noticed her. She sat alone at a table near the back, her fingers wrapped tightly around a cup of coffee, her gaze fixed on the window. Her long, dark hair obscured her face, but I sensed something unsettling in her posture, an unnerving stillness that seemed to permeate the air around her. I tried to look away, but an invisible thread pulled my attention back. Minutes rolled on, and as I waited for my cup, I became increasingly aware of the growing silence enveloping the shop. The chatter had died, replaced by a heavy, suffocating quiet that clung to the walls like forgotten shadows. I glanced around, puzzled. The barista, usually cheery, moved with an unsettling efficiency behind the counter, her eyes darting toward the back of the shop as if aware of something I couldn't perceive. That's when the woman turned her head, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of her face. The moment our eyes met, a chill rippled down my spine. Her eyes were hollow, devoid of warmth or life. They seemed to bore into me, and for a moment, I felt a magnetic pull toward her, as if she were beckoning me closer. I blinked, and the moment slipped away. She turned back to the window, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she had seen something in me, something dark. I picked up my coffee, the warmth of the cup grounding me. I took a sip, but the taste was bitter, not what I expected. The barista had made a mistake, I told myself, but the anxiety bubbled back up. I glanced around once more, and to my horror, I realized that everyone in the shop had turned to look at me. Their expressions were blank, faces frozen in time. I felt exposed, stripped of the comforting veil of anonymity that once shrouded my visits to this place. "Excuse me," I stammered, attempting to weave my way through the stillness. But my voice felt weak, swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere. As I made my way toward the exit, I felt a hand on my shoulder, cold and clammy. I whipped around to see the woman standing behind me, her face now mere inches from mine. I could smell the stale coffee on her breath, and it made my stomach churn. "You shouldn't leave," she said, her voice low and conspiratorial. "Not yet. You're part of this." "Part of what?" The thought raced through my mind as I took a step back, trying to pry her fingers from my shoulder. I felt trapped, as if the walls were closing in around us. Panic surged within me, but something in her gaze held me captive, a mix of despair and desperation that made my heart race. "Please, you have to understand," she continued, her voice edged with urgency. "They're watching." "Who?" I managed, my throat dry. "Who's watching?" She opened her mouth to respond, but before the words could escape, the power flickered, plunging the shop into darkness. The hum of the coffee machine ceased, and the murmur of voices fell silent. In the pitch blackness, the air thickened, and I could hear the woman's breaths, quick and shallow. "Stay here," she whispered, and I felt her grip tighten on my arm. Suddenly, a series of muted thumps reverberated through the shop, as if something heavy had fallen. My pulse quickened. I wanted to scream, to break free from her grasp, but fear paralyzed me. Then, like a cruel taunt, the lights flickered back on, illuminating the room once more. The other patrons were gone, leaving only the two of us in the eerie glow. The woman's face was twisted in fear, and for the first time, I noticed the faint stains of what looked like dried blood on her shirt. My heart raced. I didn't want to be a part of whatever nightmare this was, but as I stood frozen in place, I realized that leaving now would mean crossing an unseen boundary, one that might lead me deeper into darkness. "You have to trust me," she urged, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're safe with me. But we need to get out now." I hesitated, my instincts battling against the growing dread. But as I scanned the empty shop, I felt the weight of her words. Whatever was happening here, I was already entangled in it. As much as I wanted to flee, I found myself nodding, an unconscious decision to follow her deeper into the unknown. The path ahead had blurred into shadows, and I had no choice but to tread forward, hand in hand with the darkness. The bell above the door chimed a familiar tune as I stepped into the roasted bean, the smell of freshly ground coffee enveloping me like an old friend. I had hoped that a warm cup would help me shake off the unease that had lingered since the incident with Tara. The shop was usually a refuge, filled with the comforting sounds of clinking mugs and soft chatter, but something felt different today. The barista behind the counter was a young woman named Ella, her brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail. She was humming softly to herself as she prepared drinks, casting glances at the clock mounted on the wall. I ordered my usual, a black coffee, no sugar, and took a seat in the far corner, where I could watch the door. I still felt on edge, as if I were waiting for something ominous to unfold. With each sip, I tried to dispel the remnants of the day before. The way Tara had looked at me, her eyes wide with fear and disbelief, haunted me. I knew I should have been more supportive, but all I could think about was how quickly everything had spiraled out of control. I stared out the window, watching the rain trace patterns on the glass, when I noticed a figure standing under the awning outside. The man's face was obscured by the shadow of a hat pulled low over his forehead. My heart raced as he shifted back and forth, glancing nervously around as if he were waiting for someone. I returned my attention to my coffee, but the feeling of being watched was inescapable. The shop was quieter than usual, as if the rain had pulled the life out of its walls. A few patrons sat scattered at tables, but they were lost in their own worlds, unaware of the creeping tension that wrapped around me like a fog. Ella stepped away from the counter to refill a sugar container, and I took the opportunity to approach her. "Is it always this quiet here?" I asked, leaning casually against the counter. She looked up, a flicker of concern in her eyes. "It's usually busier, but the weather," she trailed off, glancing at the door. "People don't like to come out in the rain." My eyes darted back to the man under the awning. He hadn't moved, but his posture seemed more rigid, as if he were straining against an invisible force. I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. "Have you seen that guy outside?" I gestured toward the window. Ella followed my gaze, her brow furrowing. "I don't know. He's been out there for a while, hasn't he?" "Yeah." I hesitated, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. "He looks uneasy." "Maybe he's just waiting for a friend," she offered, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. The unease had crept into her demeanor, too. After a few more sips of coffee, I leaned back in my chair, forcing myself to breathe deeply. The rain thudded against the window, a steady rhythm that should have calmed me but only heightened my anxiety. I focused on the man outside again, watching as he shifted his feet, glancing around as if trying to ascertain whether anyone noticed him. Suddenly, he stepped forward, letting the awning drop behind him, and entered the shop. My heart lurched as the bell chimed, a dissonant note in the otherwise muted atmosphere. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on me for a brief moment before sliding away. I felt the urge to look away, as though the intensity of his gaze could pull me into a dark vortex, but I forced myself to maintain eye contact until he settled into a seat at a nearby table. He removed his hat, revealing unkempt dark hair. I was struck by the sharp angles of his face, the way his jawline seemed to pinch in a barely contained intensity. He looked around the coffee shop, his eyes narrowing as if he were assessing his surroundings. I tried to convince myself he was just another customer, but his movements were too rigid, too calculated for that. "Do you want anything else?" Ella asked, breaking my trance. I startled, shaking my head. "No, I'm good." I returned my attention to the man. He was now rummaging through a backpack he had slung over his shoulder, pulling out a notebook and a handful of pens. I watched him write with fervor, his brow furrowed, as if documenting some crucial discovery. A shiver ran down my spine. The way he scribbled so intensely reminded me of Tara's trembling hand, how she had been clenching it tight whenever she spoke about what she had seen. Anxiety built up within me, like a bomb just waiting to explode. Ella returned to the counter, and I leaned closer. "Do you know him?" I whispered, glancing at the man. "Not really," she replied, keeping her voice low. "He comes in every now and then, but he's never stayed this long." A sudden clap of thunder rattled the window, and I felt my heart race. The man looked up, his expression shifting to one of irritation. He slammed the notebook shut, and something flickered in his eyes. Fear, maybe? I couldn't tell. Ella turned toward him cautiously, but he was already standing up, his movement abrupt. He walked briskly toward the door, almost stumbling over his own feet, before exiting the shop, leaving the bell to chime helplessly behind him. A silence settled in the shop, and I exchanged a glance with Ella. "Something isn't right," I said, my voice a whisper. She nodded, her expression uncertain. "I'll go check on him, see if he's okay." "No!" The word burst from my lips, surprising both of us. I lowered my voice, glancing toward the door. "Let him be. Just let him go." Alice shifted uncomfortably, casting a glance toward the window. "You think he's dangerous?" I didn't know what to think. "I just don't trust him." The rain drummed a relentless rhythm outside, and as I took another sip of my coffee, a chill settled in my bones. I couldn't shake the feeling that today would reveal something I wasn't prepared for, something lurking just beneath the surface of this ordinary coffee shop. The door swung open again, and I felt the weight of dread settle upon my shoulders, wondering what would come through next. The rattling of the doorbell signaled my arrival to the coffee shop, a familiar sound that had once filled me with warmth and anticipation. Now, however, it felt like a prelude to a horror I could not yet articulate. I stepped inside, the scent of roasted beans mingling with something sharper, more acrid, a smell I couldn't place. It clung to the air like a warning. The place was unusually empty for that time of morning. Usually bustling with regulars and newcomers, the cafe now held only a few customers, their faces obscured by shadows and low light. I scanned the room, my unease growing as I noticed that Megan, the friendly barista from earlier, was missing. The only person behind the counter was an older man, hunched over the espresso machine, his fingers stained with dark brown. He seemed oblivious to my presence, his movements were mechanical, as if he were a part of the machine itself. I ordered a black coffee, my voice barely carrying over the whirring machines. The man grunted in response, hardly looking up. I took a seat near the window, hoping to shake off the odd feeling that had settled in my stomach. Outside, the world bustled on, people hurried past, unaware of the growing dread that seeped into my bones. As I waited, I couldn't shake the memory of last night, of the young woman who had sat at the table beside me. Her eyes had glinted with something I couldn't quite identify, something that lingered in my mind and morphed into a creeping shadow. I didn't want to think about how her face had twisted into that grimace, but it replayed relentlessly. I had thought it was just a trick of the light or perhaps exhaustion. Now, it felt like a premonition. My coffee arrived, steaming, yet I hesitated to take a sip. I eyed the man behind the counter. He didn't meet my gaze, instead focusing on the machine, his hand shaking ever so slightly. It struck me as odd. The man was too old to be jittery from caffeine. What had he consumed? My imagination spiraled for a moment, pairing that thought with a darker narrative. I took a sip of the coffee, trying to settle my nerves. The flavor was bitter, more so than usual, a harshness that clawed at the back of my throat. I glanced around, noticing the few patrons had grown silent, their conversations turning to whispers that seemed to hang in the air like thick fog. I focused on a couple seated in the corner, their heads bowed together. Their eyes darted toward me before quickly returning to their hushed tones. A chill swept through the cafe, and the temperature seemed to drop. I shivered involuntarily and leaned closer to my cup, seeking warmth. The coffee shop had always been a haven, a cozy escape, but today it felt hostile, almost suffocating. I sensed a shift in the atmosphere, a palpable tension that weighed heavily on my chest. Then, the door swung open with a creak, and a familiar figure stepped inside. It was Megan, her face pale and streaked with something dark, something I feared to identify. Her eyes darted around the room as if she were searching for a place to hide. As soon as she spotted me, she hesitated, her gaze flickering with recognition, but there was something else, fear. "Megan," I called, my voice trembling. I needed to know what was happening, why she looked like she had just escaped some unspeakable horror. She approached slowly, her feet dragging as if a weight clung to her ankles. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was laced with urgency and something deeper, something that echoed my own panic. "What do you mean? What's going on?" She glanced at the door, then back at me, her eyes wide. "There's something wrong with the coffee," she said, her voice trembling. "People are feeling it, but they don't know why. I didn't think it could happen here." "What are you talking about?" I felt anger rising, frustration bubbling under the surface. "You're not making sense." Megan took a step closer, her hand shaking as she gripped the edge of the counter. Just trust me. You need to leave. Now." The urgency in her voice sent a jolt through me. I cast a final glance around the cafe. The couple in the corner had ceased their whispers, and now their gaze was fixed on us, their eyes glinting with an unnatural hunger. My heart raced as I realized how their lips curled into sinister smiles. A sound erupted from behind the counter. The old man had dropped a cup, shattering it on the floor. The noise echoed like a gunshot, and suddenly, the atmosphere shifted again. The customers' whispers grew louder, their murmurs turning into laughter, high-pitched and disjointed. It clawed at my sanity, the sound wrapping around me like vines. With adrenaline surging, I turned back to Megan. "We have to get out of here," I insisted. But instead of responding, her eyes widened in horror as she turned to face the door, which had begun to close on its own, as if something unseen had latched onto it. The laughter escalated into a cacophony, and the patrons who had once seemed so ordinary now looked twisted, their features warped, their smiles too wide, too predatory. Then the lights flickered, plunging the cafe into darkness. The laughter ceased, replaced by a heavy silence. A silence that screamed. I reached for Megan, my instinct to flee overpowering my rational mind. But before I could grasp her hand, the darkness surged, spilling into every corner of the shop, swallowing everything in its path. I felt my feet move, driven by fear, but the shadows coiled around my legs, pulling me back into a suffocating embrace. "Megan!" I shouted, but my voice echoed back hollow and weak, lost in the darkness. I strained to see, to find her, but the void enveloped everything, and I was left alone, surrounded by the echoes of laughter and the promise of something terrible lurking just out of reach. Story 2, Echoes of the Unseen. The first time I noticed something was wrong with Emma, it was a Tuesday. The kind of Tuesday that clung to you like heavy fog, dulling the edges of the world outside. I was sprawled on the living room couch, half engulfed by a pile of neglected textbooks, when I heard her voice drift down the hall. It had a strange quality, an echo, a whisper that seemed to come from somewhere deep and dark. "Come play with me." It was a phrase I had heard countless times before. Emma had always been the imaginative one, her games spiraling into elaborate narratives that could pull anyone in. But this time, there was no joy, no lightness. It sent a shiver through me. I pushed myself up, brushing the tangles from my hair, and made my way toward her room. Her door was ajar, and a sliver of dim light spilled into the hallway. I stepped inside, feeling an unshakable sense of dread settle in my stomach. Emma sat on the edge of her bed, her small frame hunched over as if she were hiding something. The toy she clutched in her hands was a ragged thing, a stuffed bear that had seen better days. But it was the look on her face that made my heart race. Her eyes, usually bright and curious, were dark and unfocused. I called her name, but it came out like a whisper tangled in uncertainty. Emma? She turned to me slowly, almost mechanically, her smile warped into something that felt more like a grimace. Can't you hear them? That was when I felt it, an unsettling chill, a ripple in the air that hinted at something otherworldly. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Hear what, honey? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, even as my pulse quickened. The voices, she replied, her tone flat, devoid of the childlike wonder that filled it just days before. They want to play. My stomach nodded as panic crept in. What do you mean, Emma? I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. What voices? She tilted her head, and for a brief moment, I caught a glimpse of her, the girl who loved to chase fireflies at dusk and tell stories about the creatures hiding in her closet. But then the shadow flickered back, clouding her features. They're my friends now, she said, and the words fell from her lips like stones. That night, I sat awake, listening for the whispers. I tried to convince myself it was a figment of my imagination, the result of too many late nights and too little sleep. I reminded myself that Emma had always had an active imagination, that this was just another phase. But then I heard her again, the soft rhythm of her voice rising and falling like a lullaby. Come play with me, she sang softly, but there was a chilling edge to it that sent ice through my veins. I crawled out of bed and crept down the hall, peering into her dimly lit room. She was standing by the window, gazing out into the darkness. Cold moonlight illuminated her face, but it was not the same face I recognized. It looked strained and hollow. Emma, I called, my voice a whisper now, filled with trepidation. She turned to me, no smile, no recognition. Just that same vacant expression. What are you doing? I'm waiting, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They're coming to play. I felt a growing sense of despair as I approached her. Who's coming? The ones who want me, she replied. Her eyes flickered, and for an instant, I thought I saw a glimmer of fear in her gaze before it was swallowed by the darkness that had taken hold. I took her hand, squeezing it lightly as I led her back to bed. It's late, Emma. You should rest. As she crawled under the covers, I tucked her in, but the dread lingered. I sat on the edge of her bed, watching her for a while until the slow rhythm of her breathing settled into sleep. But I didn't sleep. I stayed, listening to the house, to the creaks and groans of wood settling, the distant rustle of leaves beyond the window. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice whispered to me, urging me to pay attention. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, things got worse. Emma's mood shifted from playful to sullen. She would stare into space for hours, as if lost in a world I couldn't reach. The voices grew louder, and I could hear her speaking softly to herself as she played alone in her room. I tried to engage her, to pull her back into our world, but it felt like chasing smoke. One evening, I caught her standing in front of the mirror in the bathroom, her reflection watching me with a knowing smile. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. Emma? She turned slowly, and the vacant expression returned. They like the dark, she said, her voice low and chilling. They tell me secrets. Fear clawed at my insides. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I decided to speak to our neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who had lived in the house next door for decades. She was known for her old wives' tales and whispered warnings, her eyes glimmering with a knowledge that felt both terrifying and necessary. When I knocked on her door, she opened it with a knowing look, as if she had been expecting me. I could sense something heavy in the air, a weight of unspoken truths. Your daughter, she said slowly, is not herself. You need to be careful. Her words sent a shiver down my spine, and I felt a rush of panic. What do you mean? Haven't you seen the signs? The changes? There are things that latch onto the innocent child, You must act before it's too late. The words hung between us, heavy with dread, and I knew that regardless of my disbelief, I had to do something. A darkness was creeping into our lives, and it was time to confront it before it consumed everything we held dear. The chill in the air had settled heavier after the sun dipped below the horizon. I sat in my dimly lit living room, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the flickering candle on the table. My thoughts drifted back to the events of the previous week, the terrifying confrontation that left me shaken and questioning my own sanity. It felt like a ghost had slipped into my life, haunting every corner of my mind. A soft knock echoed through the stillness, jolting me from my reverie. It was too late for visitors, and the thin walls seemed to draw nearer, amplifying the sound. I hesitated, my heart racing. Another knock, more insistent this time. I stood up slowly, the blanket slipping from my shoulders, and moved cautiously toward the door. Through the peephole, I could barely make out a figure, cloaked in shadows. It was a woman, her hair cascading over her shoulders like a dark waterfall. I took a deep breath and opened the door. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to sound composed even though my throat felt tight. "Are you Sarah?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, instinctively stepping back. "My name is Elena," she continued, her eyes wide and serious. I was told you may need help." "Help? With what?" My brow furrowed, curiosity battling with caution. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, glancing around as if appraising the room. "I know what you've experienced," she said, her voice trembling. "The occurrences, they're not just your imagination. You need to understand that." A chill ran down my spine. I wanted to slam the door behind her, to shut out this intrusion, but something about her presence felt urgent. "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied, though my voice quivered. "I saw the signs," she insisted, turning to face me fully. "The way your friend reacted at the cafe. The things he said, things that made no sense. I've been watching you since then." "What do you mean, watching me?" Panic coursed through my veins. "How do you know about that?" "I've gone through something similar," she confessed. "I thought I could handle it alone, but I was wrong. I lost everything." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "It took me years to find peace again. I just want to help you." I didn't want to believe her, but the fragments of my recent experiences whispered truths I couldn't ignore. The way Mark's voice changed, how it echoed with something dark and foreign during our last conversation. The cold sweats and sleepless nights that followed. "What do you know?" I asked, my voice tight as I searched her eyes for sincerity. "It's called possession," Elena stated, her expression grave. "Something or someone is trying to take over. The signs are subtle at first, shadows flickering, whispers in the dark, but they grow stronger. It wants to consume you, and it might already be working its way in." I felt the blood drain from my face as I thought of the nights I woke up, heart pounding, feeling a presence looming over me. "What do I do?" "I can help you," she urged, moving closer. "But you have to trust me. We'll need to perform an exorcism." The word hung between us, thick and terrifying. "An exorcism?" I repeated, disbelief mingling with desperation. "Yes. It's not just a religious ritual, it's a confrontation with the dark energy that has latched onto you. It's not easy, and it can be dangerous. But if we don't act soon," she let the sentence trail off, and my heart raced with the implication. "Why me?" I whispered, the shadows of doubt creeping into my mind. "Why now?" "Because you're vulnerable," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. "You've been affected by something very powerful. It senses your fear, your doubts. That's why it's drawn to you." In that moment of shared silence, I felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. It wasn't just fear I felt, there was a flicker of hope in the darkness. "What do we need to do?" I asked, my resolve hardening. Elena pulled a small, tattered book from her bag, its cover adorned with strange symbols that sent a shiver down my spine. "We need to gather some items," she said, flipping through the pages. "Salt, holy water, some herbs, things that can protect us. The most important thing, though, is your willingness to fight back." Her words ignited a flame within me. I had spent too long paralyzed by fear, trying to convince myself that the shadows were mere figments of my imagination. But now, I was faced with the undeniable truth of my situation. I had to fight. Elena glanced around the room, her expression suddenly grave. "We should begin tonight. Time is not on our side." I nodded, feeling a swell of determination. As we gathered the items, a heavy tension filled the air. With each clink of the salt container, each splash of holy water, I felt the atmosphere shifting, as if something sinister was aware of our intentions. "Are you ready?" Elena asked, her voice steady, though the tremor of fear lingered just beneath the surface. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I am." As we prepared for the confrontation, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting and contorting as if anticipating the battle ahead. The darkness felt alive, and deep down, I knew that whatever was haunting me would not let go easily. Then, without warning, the candle flickered violently, casting erratic shadows that seemed to reach out, grasping at the edges of my sanity. I clutched the table, my heart racing. "Stay focused," Elena urged, her eyes narrowed, determination radiating from her. "Whatever happens, do not give in to fear." I nodded, but a chill settled in my bones. I could feel it, the presence lurking just beyond the veil, waiting for the moment to strike. As I looked into Elena's eyes, I knew that I was about to enter a nightmare from which there might be no escape. The dawn light slipped through the cracks in the old wooden blinds, casting striped shadows across the floor. I stirred awake, confusion blanketing my mind like a heavy fog. The events of the previous day clawed at the edges of my memory. I pushed myself upright, the remnants of sleep clinging to me, and glanced around the room. Everything felt normal, too normal. The air was still, almost too still, as if even the house itself was holding its breath. I pulled myself out of bed, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that had settled in my bones. My parents had left for work, and I welcomed the solitude, thinking it would give me time to process what had happened. The whispers from the night before echoed in my mind, a soft chant that resonated in my ears as though it were still happening. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, a side effect of too much horror fiction. Yet, an unsettling thought lingered. What if there was something more? Breath hitching in my throat, I shuffled to the kitchen. The sunlight flooded in, illuminating the muted colors of the place I had called home for years. I poured a cup of coffee, hoping the familiar taste would steady my nerves. As I leaned against the counter, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. A shiver rippled through me, and I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to ward off the cold. I tried to forget about the night, but the feeling of being watched was inescapable. I glanced at the hallway leading to the living room, where the shadows seemed to deepen. I pushed the thought away, reminding myself that I was being paranoid. Voices in the dark weren't real. I was safe here. But just as I took a sip of my coffee, the hairs on the back of my neck rose. I heard something, a faint tapping, like fingernails on wood. My heart raced as I set the mug down and stepped cautiously into the living room. The air felt charged, heavy, as if I had entered a different world entirely. I hesitated, listening intently, and there it was again, a soft, insistent knock, coming from the basement door. For a moment, I stood frozen. Everything in me screamed to run, to lock the door and pretend I hadn't heard it. But some unseen force pulled me closer. I edged toward the basement door, the wood cold beneath my fingertips as I grasped the knob. It felt wrong, as if opening it would unleash something I couldn't comprehend. Just as I prepared to turn the knob, the knocking stopped, replaced by a low, guttural sound that made my stomach churn. It reverberated through the floorboards, echoing in my chest. I stumbled back, heart pounding, thoughts racing. Hadn't my parents warned me about the basement? It's just an old storage space, they'd said, nothing down there but dust and memories. Yet the darkness beyond that door seemed to pulse with life. I turned to leave, but the door creaked open slightly as though inviting me in. I stared at the cracked wood, my mind swirling with doubt. Was this the source of the whispers? My curiosity clawed at me, drawing me back. I took a deep, trembling breath and stepped forward. As I descended the rickety stairs, the darkness enveloped me like a suffocating blanket. The air was thick with the scent of mildew, and the ground felt uneven beneath my feet. I reached for the light switch, but it flickered like some cruel jest before plunging me into complete darkness. Panic gripped me, and I fumbled along the wall until I found a flashlight. The beam pierced the blackness, illuminating the cluttered space before me. Old boxes, dusty furniture, and a broken mirror leaning precariously against the wall. And there, in the corner, I saw it, a small, child-sized chair. It was out of place, untouched by dust like it had been recently used. My heart pounded as I approached. Something about that chair felt wrong. It was as if it held a memory that wasn't mine. I could almost hear the laughter of a child echoing in my mind, but it quickly shifted into a low, mocking chuckle that made my skin crawl. I stumbled backward, the flashlight shaking in my grip. The basement door slammed shut above me with a resounding thud, plunging me into a darkness so profound it clawed at my sanity. My breath came in frantic gasps, panic rising in my throat. The flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced around the room like specters. Suddenly, the child's chair moved, scraping against the concrete floor with a sound that sent ice coursing through my veins. I froze, staring as the chair rocked back and forth, though no one was there. "Stop it," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "This isn't funny." But the rocking intensified, and I felt it then, a deep, gnawing fear that wrapped around my chest like a vice, cutting off my breath. A whisper curled through the air, low and sinister, wrapping around my thoughts. "Help me." I stumbled back toward the staircase, but the shadows seemed to shift, blocking my path. The air grew thick, almost suffocating. My mind raced as I fought against the panic rising within me. I couldn't stay here. I had to get out. As I turned to flee, the light flickered one last time before sputtering into darkness, leaving me in complete silence except for the echoing whispers that filled the air. In that suffocating void, I realized I was now alone. Something had awakened in the shadows, and it was hungry. The air in the room felt thick, almost viscous, as if it had absorbed the fear that seeped from the very walls. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands clasped tightly in my lap, as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor. My breath quickened with each passing minute, tightness coiling in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness had returned, creeping into my mind during the moments when I let my guard down. It had been a week since the first incident in the attic, and I had done everything I could to distract myself. I attended classes, tried to focus on my work, and even reached out to old friends, but each interaction felt hollow, as if a part of me had been carved out. The whispers, subtle at first, had grown louder, a constant undercurrent that buzzed beneath my thoughts. I felt their presence, lurking just out of sight, taunting me, urging me to discover what lay beneath the surface. When I closed my eyes at night, I was haunted by visions of that girl, the one whose eyes glinted with malevolence, the one who had taken hold of my mind. I could still hear her laughter, twisting and contorting in my dreams, a sound both enchanting and terrifying. I had never met her, but I felt the weight of her existence pressing against my soul, as if she were pulling me into her darkness. It was on a rainy evening when the turning point came. The storm raged outside, sheets of rain lashing against my bedroom window, and thunder rolled through the air like an angry beast. I had decided to confront the fear that had clung to me for days, armed only with a flashlight and the resolve to investigate the attic again. Every logical part of me screamed to stay put, but I was sick of being a prisoner in my own mind. I climbed the creaking staircase, each step a reminder of the dread that awaited me. The attic door loomed ahead, its surface scarred and aged, the latch cold beneath my fingertips. I hesitated, my heart racing. I could turn back. I could convince myself that I was being foolish. But something inside me had shifted, a stubborn determination that urged me to push through the fear. With a resolute breath, I opened the door and stepped into the attic. The air was colder here, a stark contrast to the warmth of the rest of the house. Shadows danced in the corners, and the faint smell of damp wood and dust hit me like a wall. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating flickering motes of dust that hung suspended in the air. They seemed to swirl, almost as if they were alive, wrapping around me like a shroud. I moved deeper into the attic, scanning for anything out of the ordinary. My heart pounded in my ears, a relentless drum that echoed in the silence. I paused as my gaze fell upon an old trunk tucked against the wall, its leather cracked and worn. Something about it drew me in. I approached cautiously, my flashlight illuminating the tarnished latch that held it closed. When I lifted the heavy lid, dust erupted into the air, swirling around me like the whispers in my mind. Inside lay an assortment of items, a faded quilt, yellowed photographs, and a small, ornate mirror, its surface clouded with age. I reached for the mirror, feeling an inexplicable pull toward it. As my fingers brushed the cool glass, a chill raced down my spine. Suddenly, the attic door slammed shut with a deafening thud, and I turned, my heart racing. The air thickened, a palpable force pressing down on me, suffocating. Darkness seeped from the corners, tendrils curling around my legs, wrapping tighter with each panicked breath. I stumbled back, my hand still gripping the mirror, holding it like a lifeline. The whispering grew louder, a cacophony of voices melding into a singular chorus, each one vying for attention. I could feel them pushing against my thoughts, clawing at my sanity. My heart hammered in my chest as I struggled to make sense of what was happening. I was trapped, ensnared in a web of torment, a prisoner of my own mind. "Help me," I gasped, but the words fell flat in the oppressive atmosphere. Suddenly, the reflection in the mirror shifted. I caught a glimpse of a figure behind me, an indistinct silhouette at first, but slowly morphing into a clearer image. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. It was her, the girl with the haunting eyes, her expression twisted into a smile that sent shivers racing down my spine. "Join me," she whispered, her voice echoing in my mind, a siren call that promised both fear and fascination. I felt the ground beneath me tremble, the world shifting as her laughter rang in my ears. In that moment, I understood. This was the reckoning I had feared. The girl wanted to take me places I dared not follow. I felt my will begin to crumble, her influence seeping into my thoughts, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. I fought against it, struggling to maintain my grasp on sanity. With every ounce of strength I had left, I thrust the mirror away from me, watching as it clattered to the floor, shattering into 1,000 fragments. The voices erupted into chaos, a storm of sound that rattled the very foundations of my being. I screamed against the onslaught, a raw, primal cry that echoed through the attic. And then, silence. The air cleared, the weight lifting as if a great pressure had been released. I slumped to the floor, breathless, my heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. The attic lay still, the shadows retreating, though a lingering darkness hovered on the edges of my consciousness. I sensed it, felt it coil and twist like a serpent waiting for another opportunity to strike. I crawled toward the door, forcing myself to stand. The storm outside had passed, leaving a heavy stillness in its wake. I stepped into the hallway, feeling the coolness of the breeze brushing against my skin. Yet, the darkness lingered, haunting me with the knowledge that this was far from over. I had faced the girl, but I had not defeated her. I would need help, someone who could confront the darkness with me. The thought sent a tremor of dread through me, but I knew I couldn't face it alone. It was time to seek out those who understood the darkness, those who had battled it before. I needed to find an exorcist. The battle was just beginning, and I feared it would demand far more than I was willing to give. The air in the cabin was thick with unresolved tension, a palpable heaviness that pressed in on me from all sides. I had spent countless nights replaying the events of the past month in my mind, but nothing could have prepared me for the eerie silence that settled over the space now. I could hear the wind howling outside, a low, mournful sound that seemed to echo the turmoil within me. It was as if the elements were conspiring to keep me confined, trapped in a room where the boundaries between reality and nightmare blurred. I had made the mistake of thinking I could contain it. The entity that had latched onto my brother was growing stronger, feeding on his pain and fear. At times, I could still hear his laughter, once bright and infectious, now twisted and mocking. I was losing him, piece by piece, and every day brought with it a new revelation, a new horror that chipped away at my resolve. I glanced at the small table in the corner, cluttered with half-burnt candles and the remnants of my feeble attempts at protection. My fingers trembled as I picked up the salt I had scattered in a futile circle around the room. It was meant to trap the malevolence, to safeguard me against whatever had hijacked my brother's spirit. Yet I felt it creeping closer each day, its cold breath a constant reminder of my impotence. It had been a week since I last spoke with Father Mitchell. His words resonated in my mind, a mantra I couldn't escape. Sometimes the darkness is not what you see, but what you feel. He had warned me about the dangers of confronting such evil. Still, the fire within me burned fiercely, demanding that I try to save him, despite the risks. As twilight settled outside, shadows stretched across the cabin floor, twisting and warping in the dim light. I caught myself glancing toward the bedroom door, half expecting him to emerge, wild-eyed and frantic. Instead, there was only silence, thick and suffocating. The shadows seemed to shift, as if alive, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "I can't do this alone," I whispered into the void, my voice a mere tremor against the walls. The last time I had confronted him, I had barely escaped with my own sanity. I had been naive, believing I could reason with an entity that knew no compassion. Suddenly, an unsettling noise broke through the stillness, a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very wood of the walls. My heart raced as a chill snaked down my spine. The growl morphed into a cacophony of whispers, the words indistinguishable yet undeniably sinister. I rushed to the bedroom door, my pulse hammering in my ears. It swung open, revealing a darkness so thick it felt like a tangible force. Inside, my brother's figure was barely discernible. He sat on the edge of the bed, his head bowed, shoulders hunched, as if he were trapped beneath an invisible weight. I stepped forward, but something stayed my hand. It was a feeling, a visceral sense of dread that clawed at my insides. The atmosphere shifted, charged with an unnatural energy that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "John," I called softly, my voice tinged with desperation. He looked up slowly, his once familiar gaze now replaced by a cold, hollow stare that sent waves of revulsion coursing through me. "Help me," he rasped, the words barely escaping his lips. But it was not his voice I heard. It was deeper, malicious, as if 1,000 tormented souls were vying for release. The room vibrated with dark laughter, echoing from the very walls as shadows danced in the corners. I stumbled back, heart pounding, the raw fear threatening to engulf me. "John, fight it." You can't let it win. I pleaded, but the shadows twisted and lapped around him, whispering secrets I could not comprehend. Suddenly, he lunged toward me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the brother I had known. "It's in me," he screamed, the sound reverberating through the cabin. "It won't let me go." I felt my resolve waver, but then I remembered the salt, the prayers, everything Father Mitchell had taught me. I had to stand firm. I had to confront this evil. "I can help you," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We can fight it together." At my words, a ferocious growl erupted from his throat, followed by a blinding glare that pierced through the dim light. "You think you can save me?" he hissed, the voice no longer his own. "You are nothing. You are weak." With a swift movement, he reached for me, and I stumbled back, narrowly avoiding his grasp. Something deep within me snapped. I grabbed the salt from the table, letting it spill into a line across the threshold of the doorway. "You will not take him," I shouted, my voice echoing with newfound determination. The shadows recoiled momentarily, and I felt a surge of hope. "In the name of whatever light remains in you, I command you to leave." I spread my arms wide, salt glimmering against the encroaching darkness. A furious wind whipped through the room, extinguishing the candles as the shadows convulsed. The growl intensified, morphing into a cacophony of screams that clawed at my sanity. "You cannot banish me." "I am eternal," it roared, echoing with 1,000 voices, drowning out my cries. But I pressed on, feeling the very essence of my brother beneath the torment. "John, I'm here. Fight." I screamed, the salt shimmering like a barrier against the encroaching darkness. In an instant, the shadows recoiled, and I saw a brief flicker of light in John's eyes, a glimmer of recognition. "Help me," he shouted, desperation lacing his voice. And then the laughter erupted again, cutting through the air like a knife. I felt the ground beneath me tremble as I held my ground, praying that the strength of my love could pierce the darkness. The battle was far from over, but as long as I had breath, I would fight for my brother and for the light that still flickered in the depths of despair. Story 3: Midnight Chimes of the Unseen. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a sickly glow across the empty hallway. I had always thought night shifts in a hospital were the stuff of urban legends, tales whispered between interns about ghosts haunting the long, sterile corridors. Yet here I was, a fresh graduate, assigned to the graveyard shift in the oncology unit. I glanced at my watch. It was only 10 o'clock, but it felt like I had already been on my feet for hours. The first few hours had been the same routine, checking vitals, administering medication, and ensuring the patients were comfortable. Most of them were asleep, their faces pale in the harsh light, the rhythmic beeping of machines punctuating the stillness. I had learned early on that the night shift was quiet, almost eerily so, like the calm before a storm. I made my rounds, trying to ignore the creeping sense of unease that settled in my stomach like a lead weight. I stopped at room 307, where Mrs. Harper lay, her frail body almost swallowed by the starched white sheets. She had been with us for weeks, battling an aggressive form of cancer that left her little more than a whisper of her former self. I adjusted the blanket around her, noting how peaceful she looked, as if sleep had finally claimed her. A soft click interrupted the silence. The door to the room creaked open, almost hesitantly. Dr. Sands, the night supervisor, slipped inside, his eyes scanning the monitors. He had an air of authority about him, but there was something in his demeanor that unsettled me. Perhaps it was the way he lingered at the threshold, as if he hesitated to enter. I offered a quick smile, but he barely acknowledged me. "Is everything all right?" I asked. His gaze shifted toward me, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, fear, perhaps. But he quickly masked it behind a professional facade. "Just checking in," he replied, his voice low and controlled. Keep an eye on her vitals. They've been fluctuating. I nodded, but Dr. Sands seemed preoccupied, his attention drifting toward the window that faced the night sky. I followed his gaze. The moon hung high, casting a pale light that barely penetrated the darkness outside. It was an unsettling sight, the way the shadows twisted and danced, making the world outside appear alive, as if something were lurking just beyond the glass. Everything's fine, I reassured him, though my own heart raced. I had heard the stories about late-night disturbances, patients who whispered about shadows lurking just out of sight. I brushed off the chill that crawled up my spine. This was all in my head. As Dr. Sands exited, I returned to my duties, but the unease lingered. My rounds took me to the break room, where I poured myself a cup of coffee, the bitter brew acting as a temporary balm against the fatigue settling in. I sat, trying to focus on the paperwork that needed completing, but my mind wandered. The quiet was oppressive, amplifying every creak of the building, every distant footstep echoing through the halls. A sudden crash jolted me from my thoughts. I dropped the pen, the sound reverberating off the walls. I held my breath, straining to listen. Was someone else on the floor? I grabbed the clipboard and headed toward the source of the noise, my heart pounding. Room 310, I recalled. That's where the crash came from. My footsteps echoed as I approached, each step heavy with dread. I hesitated outside the door, the air thick with tension. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the monitor beside the bed. I pushed the door open, my pulse racing. The sight before me stole my breath. The patient, Mr. Lawson, a middle-aged man with a wry sense of humor, lay on the floor, tangled in his 4 lines. Panic coursed through me as I knelt beside him, checking for any signs of injury. Mr. Lawson? Are you all right? He groaned, his eyes fluttering open. I just wanted to get up. Needed some air. His voice was weak, the effort to speak nearly draining him further. I helped him back to the bed, my hand shaking as I fumbled with the 4 lines. You can't just get up like that. You have to call for help. His eyes darted to the window, wide with fear. There's something out there, he breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. I saw it. What do you mean? I pressed, my heart racing as I followed his gaze. The darkness outside appeared unnaturally thick, a void that seemed to pulse with malevolence. There's nothing out there. Mr. Lawson shook his head violently, his breath quickening. No, you don't understand. It was watching me. I saw its eyes dark, like the void. It was waiting for me to fall asleep. I backed away, unease turning to ice in my veins. The shadows shifted outside the window, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a figure, indistinct yet palpable, lurking just beyond my line of sight. I turned my attention back to the patient, trying to remain composed. Stay with me, Mr. Lawson. I'll call for help, I said, forcing the words out, trying to convince myself as much as him. I reached for the call button, but before I could push it, the lights flickered again, plunging the room into darkness. My heart thundered in my chest as fear wrapped around me like a shroud. I fumbled for my phone, the cold blue light illuminating Mr. Lawson's terrified face just as the door swung open. I didn't see who stood there. All I felt was a suffocating dread engulfing the room, the shadows deepening. Someone or something was here with us, and I wasn't sure we would make it to the morning. The cool, sterile air of the hospital felt more suffocating than ever as I settled into my night shift. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glare across the hallway. Shadows danced on the walls, twisting and curling as if trying to escape the confines of the reality around them. It was just past 11, and the weight of the night pressed down, thick and oppressive. I positioned myself at the nurse's station, surrounded by the hum of machinery and the muted beeping of monitors. There were only a few patients to check on that night, the kind of night where every sound seemed amplified in the stillness. I had just pulled out a book, its dog-eared pages promising a distraction from the eerie quiet, when I heard the faint shuffle of footsteps echoing down the hall. I glanced up, expecting to see a fellow nurse or perhaps a doctor making their rounds. Instead, I found the corridor empty, illuminated only by the flickering lights that seemed to stutter with every passing second. I shook my head, convinced it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Late nights had a way of bending reality, making the mundane feel sinister. My watch read 11:25 when I finally stood to do my rounds. The first room I entered was dimly lit, the patient inside asleep, a peaceful expression softening the lines of her face. I checked her vitals and recorded the readings, feeling a twinge of unease as I caught sight of shadows shifting beyond the glass panel of her door. I stepped out and froze. A figure stood at the far end of the hall, cloaked in darkness. Although the person was too far away to make out any features, the silhouette felt familiar. My heart raced as I squinted, but the figure vanished in an instant, swallowed by the shadows lurking around the corner. I dismissed it as a trick of the light or my own fatigue. The night dragged on, the hours slipping past like water through my fingers. Each time I returned to the station, I felt that same unsettling presence, as if someone or something was watching from the edges of the darkness. I could almost hear the whispers, ghostly and unintelligible, brushing against my ears. At 2 a.m., I took a deep breath and made my way to the break room, hoping a cup of coffee might jolt me awake. The flickering fluorescent lights in the break room cast erratic patterns against the walls, and the silence was deafening. I poured myself a cup, the rich aroma briefly comforting me in the oppressive atmosphere. As I leaned against the counter, I heard it again, a soft shuffling, almost like someone dragging their feet along the linoleum floor. My stomach dropped, and I hesitated, the warmth of the coffee cup contrasting sharply with the chill creeping up my spine. I stepped out of the break room, my heart pounding louder than the mechanical beeping of the monitors. With each step down the hall, the whispers grew louder, echoing up the sterile walls. I turned the corner, bracing myself to confront whoever or whatever was lurking, but found nothing. The corridor stretched before me, empty and silent like a grave. I reached the room of the patient I had checked earlier, and a chill gripped me. The door was ajar, swinging gently as if inviting me in. I pushed it open wider and stepped inside, feeling an unshakable feeling of dread settling over me. The woman was still asleep, but the covers had been pulled down, exposing her frail body. Something shifted in the corner of my vision, and I turned sharply, expecting to see someone standing there. Nothing. The shadows flickered, and I felt a cold breeze brush past me. My breath quickened, and my instinct screamed at me to leave. As I retreated to the door, I heard it, a soft whisper, just behind me. "Help me." I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs. But the room was empty, the patient oblivious to whatever horror had unfolded. I stumbled back, nearly falling into the hallway, my heart racing. This wasn't normal. The night shifts had always been quiet, but this felt different, tinged with a malignancy I couldn't understand. I rushed back to the nurse's station, my mind racing with questions. Had I imagined the voice? Was this fatigue getting to me? Or was something truly wrong at this hospital? I grabbed my phone, wanting to call someone, anyone, to shake this creeping fear that was now rooted in my chest. As I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the call button, the lights flickered ominously. The power surged, plunging the hallway into darkness. Panic surged within me as I fumbled for the flashlight in my bag, the beam piercing through the murky shadows. I glanced around, feeling more isolated than ever, the silence swallowing me whole. Suddenly, the emergency lights kicked on, bathing the hall in a sickly yellow glow. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. I needed to focus. I needed to check on the patients. I headed to the nearest room, but as I turned the corner, I saw it again. The figure, standing at the end of the hall, cloaked in darkness. I called out, my voice wavering, "Hello? Who's there?" No answer came, only the oppressive silence that followed. The figure shifted slightly, and I felt a familiar prickle of fear. I took a tentative step forward, and the figure vanished again, slipping away into the shadows. This was becoming unbearable. I returned to the nurse's station, my fingers shaking as I noted the strange incidents in the logbook. Time dragged on, and with each passing minute, the shadows felt closer, the whispers more insistent. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something that had been waiting for me in the darkness. As the clock inched toward 3 a.m., I knew one thing for certain. I had to make it through this shift, or I might never leave. The unsettling realization settled in my gut, heavy and cold. I wasn't alone in this hospital, and whatever was lurking in the shadows had its eyes firmly fixed on me. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, flickering intermittently, casting unsettling shadows that danced across the sterile walls. I had learned to despise that sound, the low, intermittent buzz that gnawed at my concentration like an annoying fly. It had only been a week since I had started my night shift at Fairview Hospital, and the unease had already seeped into my bones. I had assumed that a night shift in the quiet corridors of a hospital would be uneventful. My previous experiences in the day shift had been filled with the usual hustle and bustle, patients in and out, nurses chatting, even the occasional laughter echoing down the hall. But the night shift was different. It harbored an oppressive silence, punctuated only by the occasional distant cries or whispers. No laughter here, just the low moans of the sick and the soft scuffling sounds of feet shuffling along the floor. The clock on the wall ticked toward 2 a.m. The night felt heavy, a thick blanket that pressed down on my chest. When the phone rang at the nurse's station, I nearly jumped out of my skin. I picked up the receiver, my heart racing. "Nightingale Ward," I answered, forcing a calmness into my voice despite the tremor in my hands. "Need you in room 213, a voice crackled on the line. It was Emily, one of the night nurses. There was a pause before she added, It's urgent." My stomach twisted as I grabbed a stack of notes from the desk. I tried to shake off the growing dread as I made my way down the dimly lit corridor, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the walls. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the very air was weighted with something unseen. I approached room 213, a door that had always seemed slightly ajar, as if it were beckoning me closer with some sinister intent. I pushed it open and walked inside, the soft click of the door behind me sounding alarmingly loud in the stillness. Inside, only the soft beeping of the heart monitor broke the silence. A frail silhouette lay on the bed, barely visible in the pale light. It took me a moment to recognize her. Mrs. Harrington, a long-term patient who had been in and out of consciousness for weeks. Emily stood beside the bed, her expression pale and strained. "She's been," mumbling, Emily said, glancing back at the patient. "I can't make out most of it, but it's unsettling." I stepped closer, peering down at Mrs. Harrington. Her eyes flickered open for an instant, wide with something that sent chills racing down my spine. They're here, she murmured, her voice barely a breath. "Who's here, Mrs. Harrington?" I asked gently, trying to keep my tone soothing. She didn't seem to hear me. Her eyes darted around the room, unfocused and frantic, as if she were searching for something or someone. "The shadows, they're coming," she rasped, a shiver running through her frail body. "Shadows?" I repeated, glancing at Emily, who avoided my gaze, her own eyes wide with fear. I took a deep breath, willing myself not to succumb to the rising anxiety. "It's just the medicine, Mrs. Harrington. You're safe here." With each word, I felt the weight of my own insincerity. The hospital, once a place of safety, now felt like an echo chamber of dread. Mrs. Harrington's gaze suddenly fixed on the corner of the room, her body tensing as if she were preparing for an attack. "No! Go away!" she screamed suddenly, her voice resonating off the stark walls. I stepped back, startled. "Emily, let's try to sedate her," I suggested, trying to gain a grip on the situation. "We can't let her work herself up like this." But Emily didn't move. She stood frozen, her eyes fixed on something behind me. I turned, feeling a chill crawl down my spine. The air grew heavier, thickening with an invisible presence as a soft whisper brushed past my ear. "Leave, leave," it breathed, the voice both a command and a warning. My heart pounded, and I spun back to face Emily, but she had taken a step back, her face pale and taut with fear. "And Mrs. Harrington," I stuttered, "can you hear me? You're safe." She turned to me, her eyes wide, filled with a terror that felt all too real. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They're coming for you." I closed my eyes, willing the tension to dissipate, but when I opened them, the room felt suffocating. The shadows in the corners seemed darker, denser, coiling like serpents ready to strike. "Emily, get the medication," I ordered, needing to regain control. But before she could move, the heart monitor emitted a sharp beat followed by a series of frantic blips. Panic surged through me. "Mrs. Harrington!" I shouted, rushing to her side. Her eyes were rolled back, mouth agape as she gasped for breath, and I fumbled to call for help. As I reached for the call button, a voice whispered again, low and menacing, "Run." I paused, a chill trickling down my spine as I felt the air shift. The darkness in the corners seemed to pulse, almost alive. My instinct screamed at me to flee, but I couldn't abandon Mrs. Harrington. "Emily!" I shouted, but she was gone, vanished into the shadows. The room felt ominous, the walls closing in. My pulse raced as I fought against the growing panic. I turned back to Mrs. Harrington, but the bed was empty, she was gone. Instead, the darkness had risen, engulfing everything around me. My heart pounded as I stumbled back, the whispers growing louder, the shadows creeping closer, their presence suffocating. With nowhere to turn, I knew the truth then. This wasn't merely about a sick patient. There was something far more sinister lurking in the depths of night, something that had found its way into Fairview Hospital, and it wouldn't be satisfied until it claimed me too. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering slightly as I made my way down the long corridor. The sterile scent of antiseptic permeated the air, mingling with the faint trace of something metal, blood, perhaps. I had grown accustomed to the hospital's rhythms, but during the night shift, the place transformed into a ghost of itself, shadows looming in corners stretching into unnerving darkness. I clutched my coffee cup tightly, the lukewarm brew doing little to stave off the creeping fatigue. The clock on the wall ticked away the seconds, each one dragging longer than the last. I had just finished my rounds, checking in on the patients who were too sick to leave their beds, and the silence of the night settled heavily around me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My colleague, Jenna, a night nurse with a penchant for dark humor, had already clocked out for the evening. She had joked earlier about how the hospital came alive after hours, a living creature with its own heart and pulse. I didn't find the joke funny, especially now. I had heard the stories, whispers about strange occurrences, unexplained sounds, and shadowy figures that seemed to glide through the hallways. But I had always dismissed them as the ramblings of overtired staff. Until tonight. I took my usual route to the break room, wishing for a moment of respite. The hallway felt longer than it ever had, dimmer, as if the lights were conspiring to keep me on edge. I paused at the nurse's station, my eyes catching on the faint outline of a figure at the end of the corridor. I squinted, half expecting it to dissolve into nothingness. Instead, it remained a tall silhouette standing still, shrouded in shadow. Hello? I called out, my voice echoing back to me, swallowed by the oppressive quiet. No response. The figure didn't move. My heart raced as I clenched my coffee cup tighter, feeling the ceramic begin to crack under the pressure. I took a cautious step forward, each footfall deliberate and slow. The figure remained motionless, and as I ventured closer, I noticed something that sent a chill flaring down my spine. It wasn't just that the figure was still, it was the air around it, heavy with a sense of rawness, like the aftermath of a storm. Reaching the end of the corridor, I finally mustered enough courage to call out again. Is anyone there? The figure seemed to shift slightly, a movement so subtle I almost missed it. My instinct screamed at me to turn around, to flee back into the familiarity of the nurse's station, but I was rooted to the spot, curiosity anchoring me. Hey, can you hear me? I asked again, my voice barely a whisper now. The figure straightened, and I caught a glimpse of white, a coat, perhaps. I took a deep breath and stepped closer, adrenaline coursing through me. As I drew nearer, the figure began to fade, dissolving into the night itself, as if it had been nothing but a trick of the light. I blinked, found myself staring at empty air. But the sensation of being watched intensified, prickling the back of my neck. I turned back toward the nurse's station, my heart hammering wildly. I needed to shake this off. A quick break would do me good. I grabbed the last of the coffee and took a deep gulp, grimacing at its bitter taste. The mug clattered against the counter as I set it down, my hands trembling. A noise broke the silence, a soft thud from one of the patient rooms. My pulse quickened again, and I turned to face the source. It was too quiet for a simple sound, too unsettling. I had to check. The first room was empty, the patient asleep, their chest barely rising and falling. Nothing out of the ordinary. The second room was the same. And the third. My fear morphed into a knot of dread as I approached the fourth door, marked with a red caution, isolation sign. I hesitated, every instinct screaming against opening it. But the soft thud came again, this time louder, like something heavy being knocked over. I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking in protest. The room was dark, the only light filtering through the plastic-shielded window. And then I saw it, the patient, Mr. Abernathy, sprawled on the floor, tangled in the sheets. Mr. Abernathy. I rushed to his side. He groaned, his eyes fluttering open, but there was something different about his gaze. It was vacant, hollow. What happened? He blinked slowly, and the room felt colder, shadows curling around the furniture. They came for me, he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. I'm not safe here. A cold chill danced down my spine, and I turned, scanning the room for any sign of movement. The shadows seemed to deepen, coiling in the corners. What do you mean? Who came? I don't know, he murmured, his hands shaking. But they're here. They're always watching. A rustle echoed from the corner of the room, and I whipped my head around. The shadows shifted, and I could have sworn I saw a shape blend into the darkness, the same figure from the corridor. I felt my breath hitch in my throat, panic clawing at my insides. Mr. Abernathy, stay with me, I urged, but his gaze had turned toward the shadow, his eyes wide with fear. The air in the room felt charged, alive with a presence I couldn't understand. I gripped his shoulder, but a cold wave washed over me, and I realized the darkness was consuming the light, and time itself felt distorted. In that moment, I understood my worst fear. I wasn't alone. The hospital, that living creature Jenna had joked about, had turned malevolent, and whatever it was that lurked in the shadows had chosen this night to reveal itself. The fluorescent lights hummed like restless spirits trapped in a forgotten limbo. I leaned back in my chair, the plastic creaking beneath me, and sighed. It was just past midnight, and the hospital corridors were achingly silent. I had long ago learned the rhythm of the night shift, how it ebbed and flowed with the occasional beeping of machines and the distant echoes of footsteps. But tonight, the silence felt heavier than usual, as if it were pressing down on my chest. The corridor outside my office was dimly lit, shadows stretching and reshaping themselves as the light flickered intermittently. I rubbed my eyes, willing away the fatigue that seeped into my bones. The emergency room had been particularly busy that night, a steady stream of patients arriving, each bearing their own stories of pain and desperation. I had seen the worst of humanity that evening, and even though I was trained to be indifferent, I couldn't shake the images from my mind. I stood up, stretching my legs, and decided to take a walk, hoping to shake off the grip of dread that had settled over me. As I stepped into the corridor, the silence seemed to swallow me whole. The walls, painted a sterile shade of white, felt more like a coffin than a hospital. Each step echoed in the stillness, the sound of my shoes on the linoleum flooring punctuating the quiet atmosphere. I turned the corner toward the break room, but as I approached, I noticed something out of place. The door was slightly ajar, an unusual sight since I was sure I had closed it earlier. My heart rate accelerated, and with it, a sense of foreboding crept up my spine. I pushed the door fully open, only to find the room empty, the fluorescent lights flickering above, casting erratic shadows. The coffee pot sat cold and untouched on the counter, a stark reminder of the hours that stretched by without a break. I felt a chill wash over me, but I attributed it to the air conditioning. I turned to leave when I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. A figure darted past the window, dark and fleeting, vanishing into the depths of the hallway. My breath hitched, and I instinctively followed, my heart hammering against my rib cage. The corridor was empty, and I stood still, straining to hear any sign of life. The only sound was the persistent hum of the lights overhead. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The figure had seemed too quick, too fluid to be a patient or a staff member. I shook my head, dismissing the thought. I was just tired, my mind playing tricks on me. I continued on, determined to shake off the feeling of unease. Yet, with each passing room, I felt an unshakable sensation as if the very walls were watching me. I stopped outside room 213, a patient I had seen earlier in the day, old Mrs. Henderson, who had been muttering about shadows before they wheeled her away for a procedure. I knocked gently and pushed the door open, half expecting to find her asleep. Instead, the room was empty, the bed neatly made. The machines that had previously beeped and whirred in tandem now stood silent, a haunting reminder of her absence. My skin prickled, and I stepped back, suddenly aware of the cold draft that crept from the far corner. I turned, and the lights flickered again, this time plunging the room into darkness for a split second that felt like an eternity. I cursed under my breath, my pulse quickening as I turned to leave. That's when I heard it, a soft whispering echoing down the hall. I paused, straining to listen. It was a voice, distant and distorted, weaving through the air like a dark thread. I stepped out of the room, my instinct screaming at me to run, but curiosity held me in place. Following the sound, I moved deeper into the maze of the hospital. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me, yet I couldn't discern any words. Heart racing, I peeked into room after room, only to find them all empty. The sensation of being watched grew stronger, a weight pressing down on me as I ventured further into the shadows. And then I saw her. At the far end of the corridor, a figure lingered just outside the reach of the weak light. I squinted, trying to make out her features, but she was shrouded in darkness, her silhouette distorted. Time seemed to freeze as our gazes locked. Her eyes were wide, filled with an emotion I couldn't place: fear, longing, or perhaps something darker. "Help me," she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it echoed through the corridor like a scream. Before I could respond, she vanished, leaving behind only the lingering chill that danced in the air. Panic surged through me, and I raced after her, heart pounding in my ears. Each corner I turned revealed only more empty rooms, but the sense of dread only intensified. I stumbled into the nurse's station, nearly colliding with a colleague. "Did you see her?" I gasped, desperation flooding my voice. "Who?" he asked, his brow furrowing in confusion. "The woman, I stopped, realizing how ridiculous I must sound. "Never mind," I muttered, trying to shake it off, but the image of her terrified eyes lingered like a ghost. The night wore on, but sleep eluded me, the weight of what I had seen gnawing at my sanity. Shadows danced just beyond the edges of my vision, and the whispers, always the whispers, followed me like a haunting refrain. As I prepared for my shift to end, I felt the chill in my bones, not just from the cold, but from the knowledge that something dark lurked in the depths of that hospital. I left my post that morning, glancing over my shoulder one last time at the darkened halls, feeling the chill of her voice echo in my mind. The night had changed me, and I knew that it wouldn't be the last time I heard her call for help. Story 4: Echoes of the Forgotten Grove. The autumn air was sharp and biting, the kind that made you feel alive but also reminded you of the things that lurked in the shadows. I had heard the stories about Windermere Woods, the forest that bordered our small town, but I had always brushed them off as mere tales told around campfires. They spoke of strange lights flickering between the trees, whispers that brushed against your ears like a lover's breath, and a feeling of being watched that crept up your spine. But that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting elongated shadows that danced among the trunks, I felt that familiar churning in my gut, something deeper than fear. I had decided to take a walk, a chance to clear my head after a long week of school and a series of increasingly frustrating days at home. My mother had been unusually on edge since my father's disappearance 3 months earlier. The weight of her worry settled heavily on my shoulders, but I wasn't ready to confront it. Instead, I'd chosen to escape into the woods, thinking they might provide some semblance of peace. The entrance to Windermere Woods was marked by a gnarled oak, its branches twisted like the hands of a clock stuck in time. I stepped beneath its archway, the crunch of leaves beneath my feet strangely loud in the stillness. The forest was dense, the canopy above blocking out the last remnants of daylight. I felt an unsettling constriction in my chest, as if the trees themselves were closing in around me, their gnarled roots reaching for my ankles like skeletal fingers. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself that it was just my imagination running wild. I had grown up here, after all. I knew these woods better than anyone. I had played hide and seek with friends, built makeshift forts, and watched the seasons change in their shades of green, gold, and brown. Yet, within moments of stepping deeper into the heart of the forest, the weight of the stories I had dismissed began to claw at my mind. It wasn't long before the sun disappeared entirely, and darkness enveloped me like a thick fog. I pulled out my phone, but the screen flickered to life only briefly before succumbing to the low battery warning. I glanced around, the trees now appearing like silent sentinels standing guard over some ancient secret. My heart thumped rhythmically in my chest, a cold sweat forming at the nape of my neck. I turned back, thinking it was best to retrace my steps before the darkness became too much, but every path seemed to lead deeper into the woods. I walked faster, my breaths becoming shallow as the shadows deepened and the wind whispered past me. I convinced myself it was just the rustling of leaves, but the sounds grew more distinct, soft footfalls echoing behind me, punctuated by the occasional snap of a twig. I stopped, my heart racing, and turned slowly. The forest was empty, yet I felt a prickle of eyes upon me. I took a shaky breath and forced myself to move forward, the instinct to flee clashing with an overwhelming desire to stand still. The atmosphere felt thick, oppressive, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. That's when I heard it, a soft, melodic hum drifting between the trees. It was haunting yet beautiful, and I felt compelled to follow it, despite the warning bells ringing in my head. I pushed through the underbrush, the air growing colder with each step. The hum twisted around me like a ribbon, drawing me deeper into the shadows. I stumbled upon a small clearing lit by a ghostly glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. The source, I discovered, was a cluster of bioluminescent mushrooms, their pale light illuminating the ground and casting eerie shadows that flickered like specters. I knelt to examine them, a mix of wonder and dread washing over me. But the hum grew louder, morphing into soft whispers, indistinguishable yet oddly familiar. My pulse quickened as I recognized a voice that I had thought lost forever. "Help me," it begged, a plea that sent chills racing down my spine. I stood abruptly, my instincts screaming at me to run, but my feet remained rooted to the spot. The whispers grew more insistent, wrapping around me like an invisible shroud. I glanced around the clearing, the shadows lengthening, stretching toward me as if they had a life of their own. "Help me," it repeated, clearer now, more desperate. My heart sank as the realization hit me. It was my father's voice. The man who had vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but questions and grief. I wanted to call out, to reach for him, but I stood frozen in place, terror pooling in my gut. An image flashed through my mind, my mother's haunted eyes, the way she had clung to hope while despair loomed like a dark cloud. I had promised her I would try to find him, but what if it was too late? The whispers intensified, swirling around me, wrapping my thoughts in confusion. "Come closer," they beckoned, and something inside me, something primal, urged me to obey. I took a step forward, heart pounding, feeling the ground shift beneath me. Suddenly, the air grew starkly cold, a frigid burst that shattered the enchanting hum. I turned, my pulse quickening, the whispering fading to nothing as darkness enveloped me. Panic gripped me, and I stumbled back, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. I tore through the trees, branches scraping my arms and face, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I fled the clearing. The forest, once a childhood playground, had transformed into a labyrinth of terror, every shadow a threat, every sound a reminder that I wasn't alone. Somewhere behind me, I heard the faint echo of that haunting voice, calling out from the depths of Windermere Woods, as I plunged into the encroaching darkness, desperate for the way back to safety. But deep down, I knew I had awakened something that night, and whatever it was, it wouldn't let me go so easily. The morning light barely filtered through the ancient trees, and I squinted against the harshness of a world that felt ever more surreal. The forest was silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves shaking off the dew of the night before. I took a deep breath, trying to fill my lungs with the crisp air, but what I inhaled felt heavy, as if the very essence of the woods was tainted. It clung to me, a reminder of the stories that wrapped around this place like an old, worn blanket. I hadn't told anyone about what happened the night before. Francesca's nervous laughter echoed in my mind as she recounted how her father had warned her about the lurkers, those shadowy figures that were said to steal away the souls of those who wandered too far into the trees. I remembered her wide eyes, flickering like candles in the breeze, and I recalled my own dismissive laughter, brushing off her warnings as tales spun from the fabric of childhood fear. Yet, in the light of day, as I stood at the edge of the forest, the shadows felt more real. With a deep breath, I stepped over the threshold of the trees. The sun above struggled to break through the thick canopy, casting the underbrush into a shadowy labyrinth. My feet crunched softly over twigs and dead leaves, each crackle echoing in the silence like a whisper of warning. The air grew colder, and I shivered, not from the chill but from the creeping sense of dread that followed me deeper into the heart of the forest. As I ventured further, the path twisted and turned, the ground uneven underfoot. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Behind me, I half expected to see Francesca, her brow furrowed in concern, but the only company I had was the ever-encroaching darkness. The trees loomed like sentinels, their gnarled branches stretching out like skeletal fingers, and I had to resist the urge to look back. Each time, the thought of what might lurk behind me sent a fresh wave of unease skittering down my spine. The stories of the forest bubbled up in my mind unbidden, tales of those who entered never to return, of lost souls wandering in search of something they could never find. My heart raced as I recalled the narrow escape I had made just the night before, those eyes watching me from the shadows. I had convinced myself that it was simply my imagination coupled with too many ghost stories. But the unease had settled in my gut like a stone and refused to budge. I paused, straining to catch any sound, my ears attuned to the unnatural stillness. The forest felt alive, throbbing with secrets. Every rustle of foliage seemed to pulse with a heartbeat. The air thickened, almost sticky, as though it held its breath, waiting. I decided I needed to turn back, to shake off this growing sense of dread, but again, something compelled me to press on. A thread of curiosity twisted its way through my fear, urging me deeper into the shadows. Just then, a flash of movement to my left caught my eye, a flicker of gray among the bark. I turned sharply, heart hammering, and caught a glimpse of what I thought might be a deer. But it wasn't. The creature was too long, too thin, with limbs that bent at unnatural angles. I stood frozen, my breath hitching in my throat. The figure melted back into the underbrush, leaving behind a silence that felt oppressive. I was too far away from home now, too deep into this place that felt foreign and hostile. I retraced my steps, the ground seeming to shift beneath me. Just as I thought I might make it back to the sunlight, a voice broke the stillness. It was faint, almost a whisper, but it carried on the wind like an invitation. Help. I hesitated, heart racing once more. It could have been the wind playing tricks on my mind, but something about that plea felt real, desperate. I found myself drawn toward the sound, each step feeling more perilous than the last. The voice called again, closer this time, and I followed it, pushing through thickets that scratched at my skin. And then I saw her. A figure lay crumpled against the jagged roots of a tree, hair tangled and clothes torn. My heart sank as I approached, the reality of the situation crashing down on me. It was Francesca. I knelt beside her, shaking her gently. Francesca, what happened? She didn't respond, her eyes fluttering open just enough to catch mine, filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. And no, she whispered, as though the word was a fragile thing that might shatter if spoken too loudly. Francesca, what did you see? I pressed, searching her gaze for answers as I pulled her into a sitting position. There's something here, she stammered, the tremor in her voice making my own skin crawl. We shouldn't have come. We disturbed them. Who? I asked, glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see those long limbs slithering through the trees. The air thickened again, and I felt the shadows closing in, the forest itself suddenly feeling like a living entity, angry at our presence. Listen. She grabbed my arm, her grip fierce and urgent. We need to go. Now. As I looked around, the familiar sounds of the woods faded, replaced by a low hum that vibrated through the ground. I felt it in my bones, a beckoning that seemed to call out to both of us. Despite my instinct to flee, something about it tugged at me, whispering tales of truths buried in darkened soil. Francesca's gaze fixed on a shadow just beyond the trees, a sense of belief in her fear that twisted my gut. They're here, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I could only nod, fear paralyzing me momentarily as I met her urgent gaze. The forest lurched around us, shadows lengthening, and I felt time unravel. We had to escape. The tales of the forest echoed in my mind, and in that moment, I understood. Sometimes, the stories were rooted in more than just imagination. Sometimes, they were warnings. The sun had barely risen when I set my boots on the forest floor, the damp earth squelching beneath my weight. The chill in the air wrapped around me like an unwelcome embrace, each breath I took mingling with the mist that lingered between the trees. I had to push through the fear that gripped my chest, a vice tightening at the thought of stepping deeper into Shadowgrove Forest. The tales about this place had danced menacingly in the back of my mind, grounded not in folklore but in the whispers of those who had visited and returned, forever changed. The previous day had been a harrowing introduction to the forest. After I met up with Ryan and Clara, we had shared stories at the edge, just outside the tree line where the sunlight still fought to penetrate. Their faces turned pale as they recounted the fate of a hiker who had vanished a few years back, only to be found wandering, eyes glassy and unseeing, mumbling of things that lurked just beyond the shadows. I had brushed off their fears, attributing them to local superstition, but I felt the weight of their words as I stepped forward. Now, it felt different, far more isolating. The trees loomed like sentinels, their twisted branches stretching upwards, shrouded in a tangle of gray moss. I could hear the wind whispering through the leaves, and, beneath that murmur, the faintest echo of something else, an unmistakable pulse of existence. I glanced back over my shoulder, the path behind me receding into a curtain of darkness, and I hesitated. A sudden crack of twigs snapped in the distance, jolting my senses. I turned, my heart pounding, but the sight of the hollow trunks and twisted roots reassured me I was alone. Or so I thought. Despite the oppressive silence, I sensed that the forest was alive, its breath blending into the very heartbeat of the earth. Cautiously, I pressed on, each step drawing me deeper into its embrace. I recalled Ryan's warning as I walked. Once you're in, it's easy to lose your way. The trees change, they shift. Don't trust your instincts. I mentally scolded myself for not heeding that advice, for feeling a thrill as I ventured off the familiar trails. An hour passed, and the landscape shifted gradually, the trees becoming denser and the underbrush thicker. I found an old, gnarled tree, its bark peeling away like layers of rotten skin. It was there, beneath its shadow, that I found the first sign, a small, weathered charm, half buried in a nest of leaves. I knelt, brushing dirt away to reveal a pendant shaped like a crescent moon. My fingers trembled as I picked it up, its cool metal sending a strange shiver down my spine. I tucked it into my pocket, hoping it might serve as a talisman against whatever haunted this place. A deep rustling summoned my attention. I turned on my heel, heart racing. "Hello?" My voice echoed back, swallowed by the thick foliage. I glanced around. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Suddenly, a chilling wind swept through the trees, causing the branches to shudder like skeletal fingers. I felt watched, an uncanny sensation prickling at the nape of my neck. Pushing through a thicket, I stumbled upon a narrow clearing, the ground littered with bones, small animal remains, scattered and bleached white by time. My stomach churned, and I stumbled backwards, almost losing my footing. I could swear the air was growing heavier, more oppressive, as if the forest itself was bearing down on me. "Get out," a voice whispered, faint yet clear, echoing from somewhere unseen. It clawed at my sanity, tugging at the edges of reason. Panic surged within me, and I turned to flee, but the trees seemed to shift, blocking my path. I spun around, every direction looking the same, shadows twisting and blending together. "Help!" My voice came out as a strangled cry. I forced myself to take a step back towards the clearing, desperately searching for the way I had come. The air thickened, a suffocating presence wrapping itself around me. From the corner of my eye, I caught movement, a flash of gray, darting between the trees. It was gone before I could focus, leaving only the echo of soft, mocking laughter. I stumbled forward, my heart hammering against my ribs. The pendant in my pocket felt hot against my skin, almost alive, urging me to run. The trees twisted grotesquely, their branches clawing at the sky, as if reaching out to capture me. I moved faster, limbs tangling in the underbrush, each crack of a twig underfoot fueling my terror. Finally, I crashed into another clearing, breathless and shaking. Panic clawed at me as I took a moment to gather my thoughts. I was lost. My mind wandered to Clara's warning about the forest's ability to distort time and space, making paths lead nowhere. I had to resist the urge to scream, to call out for help. There was no one to hear me. As I stood there, A rustle caught my attention. I turned, nearly fainting as I saw a figure emerging from the trees. A woman, or what used to be one. Her dress hung in tatters, eyes sunken and hollow. She smiled, a wide, unnatural bend of her lips, revealing teeth stained and sharp. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, her voice a blend of honey and rot. "Stay with us." I stumbled back, instinct screaming for me to run, but something held me, an invisible thread tying my feet to the ground. The world swirled and taunted me, shadows creeping closer. In that moment, I realized the stories weren't just tales, they were warnings. I had trespassed into their realm, and they weren't willing to let me go easily. The pendant burned against my skin, a beacon of something I didn't yet understand, as the laughter of the forest enveloped me. I had to escape before I became part of their story, a tale echoing through the trees, lost in the shadows of Shadow Grove. The forest felt different the next day, as if it had taken a deep, ragged breath overnight. The air was heavy with an unsettling stillness that pressed down on me, wrapping around my shoulders like a shroud. Every rustle of leaves was louder, every snap of twigs sharper, as if the woods were becoming increasingly aware of my presence. I had spent the night replaying the events of the previous evening, Lily's chilling story about the haunted woods, until sleep had eluded me. Now, with the sun barely peeking through the dense canopy, I braced myself for what lay ahead. I ventured deeper into the forest, the chilling tales echoing in my mind. I had thought that dismissing them as mere stories would help me feel secure. Yet, the longer I wandered, the more I could sense that my disbelief was crumbling. Shadows folded into shadows in the underbrush, and I caught glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, only to find nothing there when I turned to look. I was beginning to feel like a marionette, strings cut, dancing to a rhythm I couldn't see. As I followed the narrow trail that wound deeper into the heart of the woods, I noticed how the light seemed to fade, swallowed by the thickening branches overhead. The air turned cold, an unnatural chill spreading through me, and I finally realized I wasn't alone. The silence was a living entity, alive with whispers just beyond my comprehension. It was the kind of quiet that thrummed with anticipation, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I recalled Lily's voice, trembling with urgency as she recounted the stories of those who had entered the forest and never returned. The villagers spoke in hushed tones about the shadows that swallowed them whole, about figures that danced just out of sight, drawing the curious deeper into the woods until they vanished like smoke. I shook my head, trying to ward off the creeping sense of dread that threatened to take root. I was here to prove the legends wrong, not to confirm them. Then, just as doubt began to gnaw at my resolve, I stumbled upon a clearing. The ground was soft and mossy, and at the center lay an old stone well, its structure crumbling and half hidden by thick vines. Something deep within me warned me to keep my distance, but curiosity overpowered caution. I crept closer, peering into the well's dark maw. The stones were slick with moisture, and I could not see the bottom. A chill shot down my spine as I imagined what might lurk down there. I leaned over the edge, my heart racing, and that's when I heard it, a low, resonant sound that seemed to rise from the depths of the well, echoing into the clearing. It was a voice, faint but distinct, and it called my name. I stepped back, my pulse quickening. "This isn't real. This can't be real," I whispered to myself. The voice became clearer, more insistent, wrapped in a haunting melody. An ethereal hum that seemed to weave through the air, pulling at the edges of my mind. I felt a pull toward the well, an urge to lean in once more, but the fear that gripped my heart was stronger. I turned to leave, but a sense of urgency held me in place. I could almost see something moving in the shadows, dancing just out of reach. "Help me," the voice cried, this time sharper, echoing in my ears. It was unmistakably female, desperate. I froze, torn between flight and the primal instinct to help. Was this another trick of the forest? Or was someone truly in need? My breath caught in my throat as I took a cautious step back toward the clearing, my instinct screaming at me to run. But then I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the tree line, watching me. For a fragmented moment, I thought it might be a trick of the light, a mere figment conjured by my unraveling mind. But the figure remained, still and silent, shrouded in shadows. "Help me," the voice called again, its desperation growing between the trees. I felt my resolve falter. The stories had warned of the forest's deceit, of how it lured the unwary with promises of aid. But something about the figure felt different. I stepped forward, drawn to the edge of the shadows. "Who are you?" I called, my voice trembling as I strained to see more. The figure remained obscured, its features hidden behind a veil of darkness. And then, just as I felt a flicker of hope, a sense of dread washed over me. The light dimmed further, shadows thickening around the clearing. The figure began to retreat, slowly disappearing back into the forest, and the voice, now faint and distant, transformed into a low, mocking laughter. Panic surged within me, and I turned to flee. I sprinted away from the well, heart pounding in my chest, the laughter echoing in my ears. The trees loomed overhead, branches clawing at my clothes, as though the forest itself was trying to pull me back. I stumbled along the path, breathless, desperate to escape the tightening grip of the haunting woods. As sunlight slipped away and shadows deepened, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was alive, watching me, waiting for my next move. The stories were no longer tales, they had become a living nightmare. And deep within, I knew that the forest had only just begun to reveal its true nature. The morning sun crept hesitantly through the thick canopy above, casting fragmented shadows on the forest floor. I had awoken with a gnawing feeling of dread, the memories of the previous day replaying in my mind like a broken record. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their gnarled branches resembling clawed hands reaching out in warning. I had thought, foolishly, that I could simply dismiss the tales I heard about this forest, whispers of lost souls and lingering spirits, but I had learned quickly that the forest held secrets far darker than I'd anticipated. I stepped cautiously along the narrow path, my heart thumping in rhythm with each rustling leaf that whispered warnings. The air was thick and humid, clinging to my skin as I ventured deeper into the woods. I felt as though I were an intruder, walking through the remains of an ancient world, where nature was both guardian and predator. The stories of those who had disappeared echoed in my thoughts, reminding me that I was not the first to tread upon this cursed ground. As I walked, I stumbled upon an old stone marker, half buried in undergrowth. The inscription was faded, but I could make out a name, something like Warren D. Oakridge, followed by a date more than a century old. I knelt beside it, brushing away dirt and moss, and felt a shiver race down my spine. Orrin had been a boy, no older than 8 when he vanished, according to the local tales. I could almost hear the whispers of his laughter lost to the forest, begging to be remembered. Suddenly, a rustle nearby made me jump to my feet. My breath caught in my throat as I scanned my surroundings, the pulse of fear quickening in my veins. I had read about the creatures rumored to lurk within shadowy figures that roamed the trees, seeking travelers to mislead. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching, waiting for me to step further into their domain. Determined not to succumb to fear, I pressed on, driven by an unexplainable need to uncover the truth. I was almost halfway through the forest when I heard it, a soft melody, drifting through the air like an enticing fog. It was faint, almost childlike, and yet it wrapped around me, drawing me in against my better judgment. I hesitated, my instincts screaming to turn back, but I fought against them. What if it was a sign? What if it led me to answers? The tune grew clearer as I approached a small clearing. I stepped into the light, where the trees parted just enough to reveal a small pond. The water shimmered like glass, reflecting the sky in unsettling clarity. Around its edge lay scattered remnants of toys, a rusted tricycle, a torn teddy bear, and a few frayed marbles that glimmered in the sunlight. My heart sank as I recognized these items from the stories of lost children. I felt the weight of their sadness pressing upon me, the air thick with their forgotten laughter. And then I saw her, a small figure standing at the edge of the pond, her back turned to me. She wore a faded dress that danced with the breeze, her hair tumbling in waves down her small shoulders. My breath caught as I took a cautious step forward, curiosity mixed with dread. Was it the ghost of a child, lost and longing for connection? "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. She turned slowly, and I was met with the hollow gaze of empty eyes. Her face was pale, almost luminous, yet devoid of any warmth or life. I felt a chill crawling down my spine, as if the very air had turned to ice. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice drifting like smoke. I stepped back, the weight of her gaze holding me in place. "Warren? Is that you?" I stammered, the name escaping me before I could hold it back. "No," she said, her voice a haunting melody that echoed in my mind. "He's gone. They all are." The forest seemed to shift around us, the atmosphere thickening as shadows deepened. I wanted to flee, to turn around and run, but her voice held me captive. "You're too late," she continued, her words wrapping around me like a vice. "You can't save them." "Who?" I asked, feeling the desperation rise within me. "Who can't I save?" "The ones who wander," she said. "The ones who never left." With a sudden surge of courage, I took a step forward, desperate to break the spell that anchored me to that spot. "What do you mean? What happened to them?" But she merely smiled, a chilling curve of her lips that sent shivers racing through me. The forest responded to her emotion, the wind swirling around us, leaves whispering secrets I could not grasp. "You'll find out," she said softly, before she turned and dashed away into the trees, her form slipping into the shadows like smoke. I stood frozen, the weight of her words echoing in my mind. The forest seemed to close in, darkness layering itself over the haunting beauty of the clearing. I could feel something shift in the air, a warning that my time was running short. The children of the forest were not just lost, they were bound, and the forest held them captive. I turned, heart pounding, and ran, my footsteps pounding against the earth, the shadows clawing at my back. The echoes of their laughter seemed to follow me, a sinister reminder that I could easily become another lost soul in this haunted place. The path twisted and turned, but I pushed on, desperate to escape the fate that threatened to ensnare me. As I burst out of the forest's grasp, the world outside felt too bright, too alive. I paused to catch my breath, the sunlight harsh against my face, but the shadows lingered at the edge of my vision, whispering that my journey was far from over. I had glimpsed the darkness, but now I was determined to uncover the truth of the forest and the whispers it carried. I would not let them consume me. Story 5: Echoes of the Forgotten Depths. I had never been the kind of person who shied away from adventure. Growing up in the shadow of the Appalachian Mountains, I relished the way their craggy peaks kissed the sky. When my friends and I stumbled upon the old mine while hiking, I felt a rush of excitement, blinded by the thrill of exploration. The mine had been abandoned for decades, its entrance gaping like a dark mouth, whispering secrets of the past. We stood at its threshold, flashlights flickering ominously in our hands, and I could hardly suppress my eagerness. "Let's check it out," I said, my voice echoing against the stone walls. Jake, who had always been the cautious one, looked at me with raised eyebrows. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly with unease. I laughed at his caution, but deep down, a sliver of doubt crept into my mind. The townsfolk had told stories, burying their warnings under layers of folklore. "Stay away from the mine. It isn't right. People have gone missing." But we were young, invincible, or so we thought. With a nod, I led the way into the darkness, the air growing thick and stale as we descended into the earth. The weight of the mountain pressed down on us, each step echoing like a heartbeat in my ears. Jake lingered at the entrance, his reluctance palpable. I turned back, beckoning him to join us, and after a moment, he reluctantly stepped inside, his flashlight beam trembling like a candle in the wind. Inside, the mine revealed itself as a labyrinth of narrow passages, their walls streaked with moisture and the occasional glint of mineral deposits. Each corner we turned led to another, deeper into the belly of the mountain. The darkness seemed to close in around us, a suffocating blanket that muted our laughter and chatter. We stumbled through the debris of old mining tools, remnants of a time when miners had ventured bravely into these depths, unaware of the danger that lurked in the shadows. An uneasy feeling settled in my gut as I thought of those men, lost in their efforts, never to return. I tried to shake it off, attributing it to the oppressive atmosphere, but as we ventured further, I caught glimpses of something out of the corner of my eye. Was it my imagination? Each time I turned, the darkness mocked me, swallowing whatever flicker of movement I thought I had seen. "Let's keep going," I urged, forcing a smile, but the laughter among us felt thin, strained. We moved deeper still, the air growing colder, the walls closing in tighter. My flashlight flickered once more, casting erratic shadows that danced along the walls, twisting and curling like living things. Jake cursed under his breath as he stomped on a loose rock, sending it skittering into the darkness, where it vanished without a sound. "Maybe we should turn back," he suggested, his voice shaky. Uncertainty and fear seeped into the air, and for the first time, I hesitated. "Just a little further," I insisted, driven by an inexplicable urge to uncover whatever lay ahead. As if in response to my challenge, the mine groaned underfoot, the sound echoing eerily through the tunnels. We rounded another bend, and the passage opened up into a wide cavern. The sight took my breath away, the high ceiling dripped with stalactites that glistened like fangs in the beam of our flashlights. But it was not the beauty that drew my attention, it was the unnerving silence. I felt the weight of something unseen pressing down, as if the very walls were alive, watching us with malevolent intent. "Shouldn't we take a break?" Sarah, the adventurous one among us, suggested, her voice breaking the oppressive quiet. My heart raced as my eyes darted around the cavern. I nodded, though unease gnawed at me. We settled onto the damp ground, our laughter replaced by uncertain glances. It was during this moment of hesitation that I noticed something strange, a series of markings on the wall, carved into the rock with a crude hand. They resembled symbols, twisting into shapes that felt ancient and wrong. I felt my stomach plunge as I traced the lines with my finger, a chill running down my spine. "Look at this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The others gathered around, their eyes widening as they recognized the same unease I felt. Jake stepped back, his face pale. "Let's get out of here," he said, his voice shaking. I opened my mouth to argue, but before I could, a low rumble echoed through the cavern, shaking the very ground beneath us. Panic surged through my veins as I glanced up at the ceiling, watching as dust and small rocks tumbled down around us. "We need to leave, now." The urgency in Sarah's voice propelled us into motion, but as we turned to retrace our steps, the darkness seemed to thicken, swallowing the flashlight beams like a ravenous beast. The narrow passageways we had traversed moments ago now felt like a maze, disorienting and claustrophobic. Jake stumbled, falling against the wall, and I turned back to help him just as a deafening crack split the air. The ground shook violently, and I could feel the walls closing in, the darkness alive with a terrible hunger. I reached for Jake, but a heavy rock fell from the ceiling, crashing down between us, sealing off the path we had taken. "Go! Get out!" I shouted, but the fear paralyzed me, and in that moment, the mine erupted into chaos. Dust filled the air, choking us as the world spun into darkness. The last thing I remembered was the sound of screaming, my own voice lost amidst the rumble of collapsing stone, and then nothing but the silence of the grave. The light from my flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows against the damp stone walls of the mine. I pressed deeper into the darkness, my heart thumping in my chest like a trapped animal. I had barely made it through the narrow passage when the memories of my last visit crashed over me like a wave, almost drowning me in unease. Last week, when I had first stumbled upon this entrance while hiking, it had seemed like a curious adventure. The mine was an old relic from the gold rush era, long abandoned and rumored to be cursed. Locals whispered of disappearances and strange sounds emanating from its depths, tales that had fueled my imagination, but I hadn't taken them seriously. That day, spurred by curiosity and a reckless sense of adventure, I had ventured inside, dismissing the warnings as mere folklore. But now, as I made my way down the meandering tunnel, I felt the weight of those stories pressing down upon me. The air grew colder, heavier, thick with the scent of wet earth and something else, something metallic that stirred a primal fear within me. I had come to explore, to conquer the fear of the unknown, but now I felt like a trespasser in a world that did not want me there. I stopped momentarily to catch my breath, my eyes drawn to the jagged rock formations that jutted out like broken teeth in the dim light. They seemed to loom closer, closing in around me. The silence was oppressive, every small sound amplified in the stillness. My heart pounded loudly, drowning out the distant drip of water from somewhere far behind. Then, just as I began to gather my nerves, I heard a soft, almost imperceptible sound. It was like a whisper, but I could not make out the words. I turned, the beam of my flashlight darting across the tunnel behind me, but nothing moved. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. The beam caught a glint on the ground, something metallic half buried in the dirt. I knelt, brushing the debris away with trembling fingers. It was an old miner's pick, rusted and covered in grime. The sight sent a chill down my spine. The last person to wield this tool might still be down here. A momentary wave of nausea washed over me as I imagined the fate that had befallen them. I dropped the pick as if it burned, the clatter reverberating through the tunnel. I stood, looking around me, my mind racing. The whispers, they had come again, and I could almost hear the voices, hushed, urgent, as if warning me. I pressed on, my instinct screaming at me to turn back, but curiosity pushed me deeper. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of sound that felt like 1,000 lost souls crying out for release. In the far distance, I glimpsed a faint light flickering, dancing at the edge of a chamber. I moved cautiously, every step echoing against the stone walls, a reminder that I was not alone. As I approached the light, it flickered more violently, as if responding to my presence. There was something sinister about its glow, an enticing warmth that felt misleading against the coldness of the mine. I reached the chamber, and my breath caught in my throat. The walls were lined with crude drawings, images of miners at work, and then, jarringly, grotesque figures that twisted and contorted in unnatural ways. I could feel the weight of their gazes upon me, their hollow eyes seeming to follow my every movement. A cold sweat broke out across my skin, each detail striking me with a growing sense of dread. These were not just images, they were a record of suffering, a testament to those who had been trapped here, consumed by the darkness. The light flickered again, and I turned toward it. In the center of the room stood a rusted lantern, its flame sputtering weakly, casting a pale glow. I stepped closer, the whispers swelling into a frantic chorus, urging me to leave, to run. Fear clung to me like a shroud, but I was drawn to the light, the desire to understand overpowering my terror. As I reached for the lantern, an icy breeze swept through the chamber, extinguishing the flame in an instant. The room plunged into darkness, and the whispers turned into a deafening roar. I stumbled back, feeling the walls close and as panic surged through me. I fumbled for my flashlight, desperately trying to pierce the void, but my hands trembled too violently. In the oppressive silence that followed, I could hear my heartbeat, a frantic drum echoing in my ears. Just as I steadied myself, I felt a presence behind me, something cold and unforgiving brushing against my back. A chill crept through my veins, my breath hitching in my throat as I turned slowly. There was nothing there, just the shadows that danced in the corners of my light. But the sensation of being watched lingered, heavy and oppressive. I needed to leave, to escape this malevolent grip that had taken hold of me. I retraced my steps, my heart racing, but the whispers had quieted, replaced by a heavy anticipation, as if the mind itself was waiting for me to discover its darkest secret. Each step felt like a betrayal of the warnings I had ignored, every inch of earth beneath me seeming to conspire against my escape. I sprinted through the tunnel, the darkness swallowing me whole as I raced toward the entrance, desperate to break free from the clutches of the cave that had taken so many before me. The chilling realization settled in. I might not be the first, and I certainly wouldn't be the last. I must have lost track of time in the mine, or maybe it was the oppressive weight of the darkness that had confused my sense of reality. I clutched the worn flashlight in my hand, the beam flickering like a dying firefly as I stood at the edge of an underground chamber. The walls, slick with moisture and age, glistened like the scales of some ancient beast. The air was thick, suffocating, smelling of damp earth and something far more sinister, something that clung to the back of my throat and made me want to gag. I had come here, lured by tales of treasure hidden deep in the old abandoned mines, stories whispered among the locals who had long avoided the cursed place. But now, deep within the bowels of the earth, I realized the truth. There was no treasure, only a lingering dread that seeped into my bones. I could have turned back, could have retraced my steps along the narrow tunnels that had brought me here, but a morbid curiosity rooted me to the spot. The cavern was vast, its ceiling lost in shadows that clung to the jagged rock like a shroud. The flashlight's beam danced across the walls, revealing markings etched into the stone, symbols I could not decipher. I leaned closer, the beam illuminating faint streaks of red that looked disturbingly like blood. My stomach twisted at the thought, and I stumbled back, my heart racing as the echo of my footsteps reverberated around me. It was then that I heard it, a soft scratching, like nails against stone. My breath hitched as I turned slowly, the beam of light slicing through the dark in a desperate search for the source. For a moment, there was only silence, the kind that envelopes you in a chilling embrace and makes you acutely aware of your own heartbeat. I steeled myself, convinced it was just my imagination, but the scratching resumed, louder this time, accompanied by a faint rasping sound that seemed to echo in all directions. Panic surged, and I backed away instinctively, my mind racing with thoughts of what could be lurking just beyond the beam of light. I needed to leave. I had to find my way out. But as I turned, the flashlight flickered again, plunging me momentarily into a suffocating darkness. I cursed under my breath, pounding the side of the flashlight with my palm until the beam sputtered back to life. A wave of relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Ahead, in the dim light, I saw a shape emerging from the shadows. It stood at the edge of my vision, half obscured, but it was unmistakably there, tall, gaunt, and impossibly still. My heart thundered, and I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, as if whatever it was sensed my fear. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, forcing it to illuminate the figure. The beam fell on empty air. The shape had vanished. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I could feel the walls closing in, the mind's oppressive darkness wrapping around me. I needed to escape before the madness consumed me. I pivoted, retracing my steps through the narrow corridor, my footsteps echoing wildly as I moved with a growing sense of urgency. Yet, the deeper I went, the more disoriented I became. The tunnels twisted in ways that defied logic, branching off into darkness and leaving me with no sense of direction. I cursed myself for not paying closer attention to how I had entered. The scratching sound had returned, now accompanied by a low, almost mournful groan that resonated from deep within the mine, chilling me to the core. Each step was a struggle against the walls of fear closing in around me. I could almost feel the mind breathing, a living entity intent on keeping me within its grasp. I thought of the tales I had heard about miners who had vanished without a trace, swallowed by the earth, leaving nothing but hushed whispers behind. What if I became one of them? As I turned a corner, I stumbled upon an old mine cart, rusted and half buried beneath dirt and debris, a relic of a time long gone. I hesitated, glancing around as if expecting someone or something to emerge from the shadows. My skin crawled as I approached the cart, flashlight trembling in my hand. Among the debris, I saw something glinting, a small metal object, half buried. My heart raced as I bent down to retrieve it, brushing aside the dirt to reveal a tarnished locket. It felt cold and heavy in my palm, and as I opened it, a tattered photograph slipped out, two faces, smiling, framed with a joy that felt painfully out of place in this suffocating darkness. I felt a stab of sorrow, but I didn't linger. Behind me, the scratching intensified, now accompanied by whispers that seemed to wrap around my thoughts, beckoning me to stay. I shoved the locket into my pocket and turned to flee, but the walls echoed with a sudden cacophony of noise, clattering, scraping, and a voice, or what I hoped was a voice, crying out through the darkness. I sprinted back the way I had come, desperate to escape the suffocating grip of the mine. With every turn, my flashlight flickered again, and just as I rounded a corner, it went out, leaving me in pitch blackness. I stumbled, my hands bracing against the cool stone walls, panic creeping into my chest as I stumbled forward. The whispers grew louder, an almost tangible force that pushed against me. I could hear the scratching now, close behind, relentless. I had to get out. My lungs burned, and the darkness pressed down like a weight as I pushed forward. I could hardly breathe, the air laden with dust and something else, something foul. My thoughts spiraled. I would not end up like the others. I refused. Then, in the distance, I saw a faint glow. Hope surged through me, and I ran, ignoring the fear gnawing at my heels. The light grew brighter, illuminating the stone walls with a pale, sickly hue. I reached the source, a crack in the rock, a sliver of daylight spilling through like salvation. But as I approached, the whispers turned to screams, echoing off the walls, resonating with a terrible urgency. I hesitated, glancing back, and in that moment, a figure stepped into the light, a face twisted in despair. It wasn't just my imagination. The horrors of the mine were real, and they were hungry. In that fleeting moment of clarity, I realized that the mine was not just a place of darkness, it was alive, and it would not let me leave. The flickering light of my headlamp barely illuminated the jagged walls of the mine as I pressed deeper into its suffocating embrace. Each step echoed, a haunting reminder of my solitude. The air felt heavier here, thick with dust and something else, something foul and ancient that prickled at the back of my throat. I could have turned back. I should have turned back. Yet, driven by a mix of dread and determination, I ventured further into the darkness. The passage narrowed, forcing me to slide my shoulders against the damp stone. My thoughts drifted to the warnings, the stories that had woven their way through the town like a chilling breeze. The mine had swallowed men whole, leaving only silence in their wake. I shivered, recalling the old-timer's haunted eyes as he cautioned us about the things that slumber below. I had brushed it off, thinking tales of darkness were merely folklore, a way to keep children from wandering too close. Yet, as I pressed on, doubt gnawed at my resolve. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a cavernous chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. My flashlight beam danced across the walls, revealing strange symbols etched into the rock, twisted sigils that throbbed with an unsettling energy. I could almost hear them whisper, beckoning me closer. My heart raced, a primal response to an instinct I couldn't ignore. Curiosity mingled with fear, pulling me deeper into this otherworldly expanse. As I stepped forward, a soft sound caught my attention, a faint echo of something beneath the surface. It was a low, rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat. My pulse quickened in response, drumming a chaotic rhythm in my ears. I strained to identify the source, but the sound seemed to come from the very walls of the mine itself, reverberating through the rock. The feeling of being watched settled over me once more. I was not alone. Clenching my fists, I took a deep breath and pressed on. I approached the far wall, where the thumping was strongest, and noticed a crack in the stone, a fissure that seemed to breathe. I leaned closer, drawn by an inexplicable compulsion, and a rush of cold air swept over my skin, making me shudder. The thumping grew louder, more insistent, and I backed away, instinct telling me to flee. But then I saw it, a glimmer of something deep within the crevice. An object, half buried in the earth, glinting like a beacon. Against my better judgment, I reached out, my fingers brushing against the rough surface. It was a metal lantern, tarnished with age, though the glass was surprisingly intact. An inscription circled its base, the letters worn but legible, "Stay close to the light." The thumping stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence that felt like a physical weight pressing down on me. It was as if the mine itself held its breath, waiting for my next move. I hesitated, the lantern heavy in my hands, before deciding to turn it on. A flicker, and then a warm glow illuminated the chamber, dispelling some of the darkness that surrounded me. What I had hoped would bring comfort instead set off a new wave of panic. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting and contorting in unnatural ways. My heart raced as my mind conjured images of the stories I had dismissed, the miners who had entered and never returned, the whispers of creatures lurking in the darkness. I turned to leave, but the ground beneath me shifted, gravel sliding away as a snarl erupted from the depths of the mine. The thumping returned, louder, more furious, resonating through the walls like a warning. I stumbled back, the lantern casting frantic beams of light as I searched for an escape. My breath came in ragged gasps, a primal instinct urging me to flee. Then, from the shadows, a shape emerged. It was a silhouette of something large, towering, its form undulating as if made from shadows themselves. I blinked, and it seemed to shift closer, darkness pooling around its limbs. Fear gripped me, paralyzing my thoughts. I couldn't move. I could only stare into the abyss that was staring right back. In that moment, I remembered the lantern's inscription. "Stay close to the light." With a sudden surge of will, I turned the light directly at the figure. It flinched, a shuddering movement that sent ripples through the darkness. I realized its fear of the light mirrored my own terror of the shadows. Not wasting another second, I dashed back towards the narrow passage, the lantern swinging wildly in my grip. With frightening speed, the entity pursued, its form stretching and distorting, whispering sounds that clawed at my sanity. The thumping echoed in my ears, melting with the pounding of my heart. I sprinted, slipping and sliding in the loose gravel, the light flickering with each frantic step. I could see the exit, the glimmering daylight just beyond the stone maw of the mine. My lungs burned as I pushed myself harder, every fiber of my being screaming at me to survive. The shadows reached for me, clawing at my back, but the light pulsed brightly, holding them at bay. With a final surge of strength, I burst out of the mine, tumbling into the sunlight. I collapsed on the ground, gasping for air, the warmth of the day wrapping around me like a blanket. I turned back to look at the entrance, still clutching the lantern as if it were a lifeline. The thumping had ceased, but I could feel the darkness watching, waiting just beyond the edge of the light. I was free, but the mine still held its secrets, and I knew this encounter was only the beginning. The darkness of the mine enveloped me like a thick, suffocating shroud, the air growing heavier with each step deeper into the earth. The flickering beam of my flashlight danced erratically on the jagged walls, casting elongated, grotesque shadows that twisted and writhed in the periphery of my vision. I had ventured further than I ever intended, each shuffling footfall echoing ominously off the damp stone. The malodorous scent of decay hung in the air, mingling with the stale aroma of the earth itself, a reminder that I was intruding into a world long abandoned. After the discovery of Mark's torn jacket, the oppressive dread that had gripped my heart since entering this cavernous hell had twisted into a more urgent panic. I thought I could reason my way through the darkness, that I could navigate the maze of tunnels using only my common sense. But reason had fled, replaced by an instinctual fear that clawed at my gut. I needed to find Mark, needed to ensure that he was safe, or at least discover what had happened to him. The deeper I went, the more the mind seemed to come alive. The sound of dripping water echoed like the slow, deliberate ticking of a clock, reminding me that time was slipping away. I paused to listen, hoping to catch the faintest hint of Mark's voice. But instead, I was met only with the deafening silence, a silence that felt more like a warning than an absence of sound. I pressed on, anxiety coiling tighter around my chest. Abandoned machinery and rusted tools lay strewn about like the remnants of some forgotten nightmare. Each step felt like a sacrilege. I half expected the walls to shift and close in, to trap me in this suffocating tomb. My mind raced with images of what could be lurking in the shadows, creatures that had consumed Mark, or worse, his lifeless body among the rubble. It was then I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper that fluttered through the dark like a moth against my skin. I stopped abruptly, my breath hitching in my throat. I strained to listen, hoping to discern what had spoken. The silence returned, mocking my vigilance. I shook my head, convincing myself it was merely a figment of my imagination, a product of my frayed nerves. As I moved forward again, a faint glow caught my eye. I hurried toward it, heart racing with renewed hope. The light flickered like a candle, and for a moment, I dared to believe it was Mark. Perhaps he had found a way to navigate this hellhole and was waiting for me, ready to escape together. When I rounded the corner, the glow intensified, revealing something far worse than I had anticipated. It was not a flickering candle, but a pool of luminescent fungi, casting an eerie blue light over the walls. The sight was mesmerizing yet unsettling, as if the mine, in its death throes, had birthed something unnatural. I knelt beside the pool, clutching my flashlight tightly. Tendrils of the fungus twisted and spiraled across the stone floor, leading deeper into the darkness. The very ground seemed to pulse beneath my fingers. My breath quickened as I followed the trail, each step a mixture of dread and curiosity. The tunnel widened, revealing an expansive cavern that made my skin crawl. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like the teeth of some monstrous beast, and the walls glistened with moisture that dripped rhythmically down like the faint heartbeat of the mine itself. And in that moment, I felt it, a heavy presence, a weight that settled on my shoulders, making it hard to breathe. Then I saw it. A shape, barely distinguishable within the shadows, sat hunched against the wall. My heart thundered in my chest as I called out, my voice barely more than a whisper, "Mark." The figure stirred, and the faint glow illuminated his face, or what used to be his face. I gasped, stumbling backward as I realized that it was not Mark. It was something else entirely. Eyes sunken like dark pits, skin stretched taut over a skeletal frame, its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin that did not belong on a human being. My mind raced. Where had it come from? What had happened to Mark? Fear surged through me, a primal instinct screaming that I should flee, but my legs felt rooted to the ground. The creature cocked its head, its smile widening impossibly, the darkness around it seeming to pulse and shift. I tore my gaze away, heart pounding in my ears, and darted back down the tunnel from which I had come. Panic propelled my feet. I needed to escape, to get back to the entrance before whatever dwelled in this mine could track me down. The oppressive air felt thick as I hurried, the darkness closing in as though the mine were alive, a giant maw eager to consume me whole. With each frantic step, I cursed myself for ever setting foot in this wretched place. I could still hear the distant echoes of the creature behind me, its laughter mingling with the sound of my own ragged breaths. I could not let it win. I would not be another victim of these cursed tunnels. I broke into a desperate sprint, the beam of my flashlight flickering as I raced through the twisting passages, hoping to find the way back to the world above. But the darkness was relentless, and the further I ran, the more disoriented I became. I had lost my way, enveloped in an endless labyrinth of stone. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm me, I saw a glimmer of light ahead, an exit. I prayed. I pushed forward, adrenaline surging through my veins, embracing the hope of freedom. Yet, as I neared the light, the chill of dread washed over me once more. The darkness had not relinquished its grip, it had only begun to reveal its true horrors. Story 6, Last Stop at Midnight Pump. The rain hammered against the windshield, a relentless percussion that drowned out the world outside. I had been on the road for hours, chasing the last remnants of daylight as dusk curled its fingers around the horizon. My old sedan was a loyal companion, though its engine had begun to cough and sputter, warning me that it wouldn't last much longer. I didn't want to be stranded out here, miles from the nearest town, where silence draped over everything like a heavy blanket. The sign for Haverford gas station flickered to life as I rounded a bend in the road. It stood alone, a relic from a bygone era, with peeling paint and an ancient neon sign that buzzed faintly. I pulled in, tires crunching over gravel as I parked under the dim light of a flickering bulb. The gas station looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years, but I needed to fill up before venturing deeper into the woods ahead. Grabbing my jacket, I stepped into the damp air, the smell of wet asphalt mingling with the faint tang of gasoline. As I approached the door, it creaked open, revealing a dimly lit interior that felt more like a tomb than a store. The air was stale and thick, and the low hum of an old refrigerator was the only sound that accompanied my cautious footsteps. Behind the counter stood a figure, eyes barely visible beneath a hood that shadowed his face. He looked up slowly, and I caught a glimpse of skin that had the pallor of moonlight, smooth and waxy, as if he hadn't seen the sun in years. "Evenin'," he said, his voice raspy like gravel. He didn't smile, but his lips curved slightly as if they had forgotten how to do so entirely. "Hi," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Just need to fill up my tank." "Sure thing," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. He stepped back, revealing the old-fashioned pump behind him, its metal surface rusted but still functional. "You got cash?" "Yeah, I do." I fumbled in my pocket for the crumpled bills, feeling a twinge of unease as I realized how isolated I was. There were no other cars in the lot, no other customers milling about. It was just me and this man, and something about the way he stared made the hairs on my neck stand up. As I filled my tank, I glanced at the shelves lined with dusty snacks, the labels faded and peeling. A radio crackled softly in the background, playing a tune that felt decades old. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the man was scrutinizing every move I made. I focused on the sound of the gasoline pouring into my tank, hoping it would drown out the unease gnawing at my insides. "Long way from home?" he asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "Just passing through," I managed to say. "Headed to the hiking trails up north." "Be careful out there," he replied, and there was an edge in his tone that made me shiver. "Things aren't what they used to be. The woods can be unwelcoming." "I'll keep that in mind," I said, trying to keep my tone light despite the growing chill in the air. I finished filling the tank and moved back to the counter, laying the cash down with a shaking hand. "Thanks," I said, ready to leave this unsettling space behind me. But he didn't reach for the money. Instead, he leaned forward, his face just inches from mine, and I could see the faint glint of something sharp tucked into his coveralls. "You really ought to be careful," he repeated, his voice lower now, almost conspiratorial. "Not everyone who wanders into the woods comes back out." I felt my stomach drop, and I forced myself to meet his gaze. There was something in his eyes, a buried fear, perhaps, or something darker. "I appreciate the warning. Sometimes it's not the woods you have to worry about. His lips turned up into a slow, unsettling grin that didn't reach his eyes. It's what's already living in the shadows. I didn't want to know what he meant, but a chill swept through me, and I backed away from the counter, my heart racing. I need to go, I stammered, turning toward the door as quickly as I could without appearing to flee. The rain had intensified outside, drumming against the roof like an impatient reminder of the storm brewing above. I pushed through the door, the bell chiming behind me, and hurried to my car, my heart pounding relentlessly in my chest. I could feel his gaze on me, heavy and predatory, even as I climbed into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. With shaking hands, I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered, coughed, and finally roared to life. I glanced in the rearview mirror as I pulled away, half expecting to see him standing in the doorway, watching me leave. But the gas station was quiet now, a dark silhouette against the stormy backdrop of trees. As I drove deeper into the night, I couldn't shake his words from my mind. The woods loomed ahead, dark and impenetrable. I hoped the path would lead me to safety and that whatever haunted this stretch of road wouldn't find me. I just wanted to escape the oppressive weight of that gas station, the unsettling presence of the man who warned me, and the feeling that I had only just begun to uncover something far more sinister lurking in the shadows. The hum of the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, creating an unsettling symphony of unnatural sound amidst the stillness that blanketed the gas station. I remained frozen in place, my fingers curled tightly around the cold metal of the pump, waiting for the gallons to fill the tank. The gas gauge moved steadily, inching towards full, but my focus was diverted. My eyes darted around the small, dimly lit station. The shelves, once stocked with snacks and drinks, were sparsely populated, as if they had been raided during a hasty escape. A few faded candy bars leaned against the glass, and dust coated the display of soda bottles, the colorful labels practically begging for attention. But the absence of movement was more unsettling than the forlorn products. I had planned to stop here just long enough to refuel before heading back on the winding road leading to the comfort of home. A swarm of adrenaline still coursed through my veins from the unsettling incident at the last pit stop, an elderly man in an oversized jacket who had stared at me with eyes so hollow they seemed to swallow the light. I could still picture the way he had shuffled closer to my car, his breath visible in the cold, as he muttered incoherently. The air had thickened with unease, and my instincts urged me to escape. Now, in this gas station, I felt that same sense of dread tightening around my throat. The air was stale and heavy, and the lingering scent of gasoline mixed with something far more pungent. It was almost metallic. I glanced toward the glass door, the only entrance, imagining the world beyond it, filled with night and shadows. The attendant's booth loomed near the back of the station. I hadn't yet seen the attendant, and the emptiness of the place made me wonder if I had stumbled upon a ghost town. Against my better judgment, I decided to seek some human presence, hoping to dispel the suffocating silence. I approached the booth cautiously, the floor creaking beneath my feet. The thick glass separating me from the attendant seemed like a barrier to sanity. I rapped lightly on the glass, my heartbeat echoing loudly in the otherwise quiet room. There was no response. The booth was empty, save for a flickering computer screen that cast a ghostly glow. "Hello?" I called, my voice breaking the stillness. The sound felt foreign, as if the station itself had swallowed it whole. After a moment, I peered into the darkness beyond the booth. A flicker of movement caught my eye, a shadow sliding past the shelves. I hesitated, my instinct screaming at me to turn back to my car, to flee this place. But curiosity clung to me, like a moth drawn to a flame. Slowly, I moved further into the station, my footsteps muffled by the worn linoleum floor. Shadows danced as I ventured deeper, and I passed aisles of forgotten products that seemed to watch me, their labels peeling and faded. I called out again, louder this time, "Is anyone here?" Nothing but silence answered me. Just as I turned to retreat, I heard it, a low, grating sound emanating from the back of the store, a rasping breath, or perhaps the shuffling of feet. Panic gripped my chest. I looked back toward the entrance, but the cold air outside felt like a distant memory. The invisible weight of something unseen pressed against me. With a deep breath, I forced myself to move closer to the source of the sound, each step feeling like I was descending into a realm of dread. In the far corner of the station, I spotted a door slightly ajar, a metal door that looked like it had led to a storage room or a maintenance area. The sound came from behind it, a soft rustle mixed with faint whispers. I stood frozen, my mind racing with possibilities, each darker than the last. I pressed my ear against the cold metal, straining to hear. The voices were low and indecipherable, laced with a sense of urgency. Fear coiled in the pit of my stomach, yet my hand reached for the doorknob, trembling but compelled to know the truth. Before I could turn it, I heard a sudden crash from the front of the station, followed by the unmistakable sound of shuffling. I jerked back, my heart racing, as I turned to face the entrance. A figure emerged, silhouetted against the dimly lit exterior. My breath caught in my throat as I realized it was a man, tall and gaunt, with a face obscured by the shadows of his hooded jacket. "Hey," he called out, his voice oddly calm, unnervingly flat. "You lost?" I took a step back, trying to assess whether he was a threat. His eyes flickered towards me, sparking recognition or something more sinister. The man stepped closer, and I caught a glimpse of his gaunt features, streaked with grime. There was a wildness in his demeanor, a raw desperation that sent shivers through me. "I'm just trying to get some gas," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that sent prickles down my spine. "Gas doesn't come easy around here." The door to the storage room loomed behind me, its presence heavy and foreboding. The whispers from within seemed to intensify, the urgency almost pleading now. I was caught between the man's unsettling presence and the unknown lurking in the shadows behind that door. "Best get what you need and move along," he said, taking another step closer. Each movement felt deliberate, calculated, as if he were a predator sizing up his prey. The buzz of the fluorescent lights grew louder, a reminder of my isolation in this desolate place. I felt trapped. The gas gauge on my car was full, but the road ahead felt infinitely distant. "I think I should just go," I managed to say, backing away, my hand instinctively brushing against the cold metal of the door behind me. "Go," he echoed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Where would you go?" His smile twisted into something uncanny, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too eager. My instinct screamed at me to run, to escape this nightmare, but my legs felt rooted to the floor. Just as I turned to yell for help, I heard the whispers again, louder now, desperate and filled with entreaty. They came from the door behind me, and in that moment, I realized I was standing at the crossroads of fear and curiosity, a choice that would forever alter the course of my life. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering intermittently as I stepped inside the gas station, the door chiming softly behind me. The smell of stale coffee and burnt rubber filled the air, a stark contrast to the cool evening outside. Darkness loomed beyond the glass doors, broken only by the occasionally passing car headlights. I had hoped to find refuge and perhaps a moment of solace, but the cracked linoleum and half-empty shelves suggested otherwise. "Just a quick stop," I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in my guts since I left my house earlier that afternoon. I walked up to the counter, where a worn-out man with graying hair and deep-set eyes looked up from his newspaper. His skin had a pallor that suggested he rarely saw daylight, and his gaze held a peculiar intensity, as if he were measuring the worth of my presence in his dim establishment. "Evening," he grunted, his voice rough like gravel. I nodded in response and forced a smile, feeling the weight of his stare as I perused the shelves. The snacks looked ancient, dust gathering on the wrappers. I scanned the drink cooler, seeking something to quench my thirst. All I needed was a bottle of water. I didn't plan on lingering longer than necessary. Long trip? The man asked, leaning forward slightly, interest piqued. Just passing through, I replied, my voice catching slightly. Shouldn't be here too long. He raised an eyebrow, pulling his newspaper down just enough to let me see the smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. Most who pass through here don't end up leaving as quickly as they think. I forced a laugh that sounded hollow even to my ears. Yeah, well, I'm not looking for any detours. His grin widened, revealing teeth that were more missing than present. Just watch yourself at night. Strange things happen out here. I took a quick glance around, the shadows in the corners of the store feeling heavier than before. Right, I said, forcing a casual tone that I hoped would cover the tremor in my voice. I'll keep that in mind. I grabbed a bottle of mineral water from the cooler and set it on the counter. The man rang it up, his eyes flicking back to me, sizing me up as he spoke. You drive much at night? More than I'd like, I admitted, my thoughts drifting back to the road that lay ahead of me. It was a long stretch of highway, winding through forest and fields, with only the occasional flicker of distant lights to break the expanse of darkness. Careful out there, he warned, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Sometimes people don't come back. The woods, they have a way of keeping folks. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled at his words. I had heard stories about this area, locals who disappeared, houses left abandoned, whispers of something lurking just out of sight. Right. I'll be careful. I took my water and paid, eager to leave the ominous atmosphere behind. As I turned to leave, the door chimed again, but what struck me was the sudden drop in temperature. I shivered as a gust swept through the entrance, carrying with it a sound of rustling, like leaves whispering secrets. I glanced back at the man behind the counter, but he had resumed his reading, seemingly unfazed by the chill. I stepped outside, clutching the water bottle tightly as I walked back to my car. The light from the gas station flickered behind me, and I could feel the weight of the night settling in. The quiet was unnerving, the only sounds being the rustle of branches and the distant hoot of an owl. I reached my car, the old model groaning in protest as I opened the door and slid inside. The engine started with a sputter, and I pulled out of the gas station, my nerves taut as I felt the weight of the forest creeping closer on either side of the road. Shadows danced along the pavement as I drove, the headlights slicing through the darkness but doing little to dispel the feeling of being watched. The man's warning echoed in my mind, and I gripped the steering wheel tighter, anxiety prickling at the edges of my thoughts. The road ahead stretched on, and my mind began to wander. I thought about my life back home, the mundane trials and tribulations that felt so distant now. I longed for the familiarity of those days, but the darkness out here was that of a different kind of foreboding that clung to the atmosphere like fog. As I drove deeper into the night, I became aware of a vehicle behind me. It was positioned far enough to stay out of my rearview mirror, but I felt its presence like a shadow creeping closer. I glanced in the mirror again, but nothing stirred behind me but darkness. The tension in my chest tightened as I pushed the gas pedal down. The vehicle persisted, maintaining a safe distance, but its headlights blared like an accusing finger pointing directly at me. I could almost hear the taunting laughter, the chill of fear clawing at the back of my mind. I considered pulling over, but something told me it wouldn't be safe to stop. Suddenly, I heard a loud thud, a sharp sound coming from the back of my car, followed by a shudder that rattled my teeth. My heart raced as I glanced back once more, and dread seeped into my bones. The figure had emerged from the shadows, a silhouette framed by the dim lights of the road. My foot pressed harder against the gas as panic surged through me. Ahead, the road twisted sharply around a bend, and I could see the outline of trees closing in like sentinels. I fought back the urge to scream, my breath quickening as I pressed on, desperate to escape whatever horror pursued me in the night. The gas station faded into the distance, and for a moment I thought I'd left it behind. But as the darkness rushed past, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, something that had slithered out of the woods and into the heart of my fear. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror again, and that's when I saw it, a pair of glowing eyes glinting in the night, hauntingly familiar, staring right back at me. The fluorescent lights flickered above me, casting an eerie glow over the desolate gas station. It was a strange contrast to the vibrant world I'd known just hours before, where the sun shone brightly and laughter echoed through the air. Now, all that remained was a cold emptiness, haunted by the lingering shadows of a place that had once been bustling with life. I leaned against the counter, the slick surface cold against my palm, and surveyed the small store. A few bags of chips lay scattered on the shelves, their colorful packaging faded and dusty, while a solitary soda machine hummed softly in the corner, its mechanical whirring an unsettling reminder of my isolation. It was just me in the night, a landscape of uncertainty stretching out in front of me. I had promised myself I would only stop for a few minutes, just long enough to gather my thoughts and refill the tank. But as I filled my car with gas, I had felt a sudden unease, a weight pressing down on me, heavy and suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I glanced around the empty station, half expecting to see someone watching me from the shadows. But the only company I had was the echo of my own breathing. I approached the door, pushing it open with a creak that reverberated through the stillness. The night air was thick and suffocating, carrying with it an unsettling stillness that buzzed in my ears. I tried to shake it off, reminding myself that I was being paranoid, but the weight in my chest only grew heavier. Getting back into my car, I locked the doors and turned the engine over. The familiar rumble soothed me, but the sound of it echoed too loud against the silence of the night. I needed to leave, needed to put miles between me and this strange place, but the fuel gauge blinked at me mockingly. I took a deep breath and turned back to the gas station, hoping the attendant might appear, perhaps a friendly face to ease my anxiety. But as I entered, a shiver raced down my spine. The store was even darker now, shadows crawling across the walls as if something had shifted in the air. I moved cautiously, my footsteps muffled against the cracked linoleum floor. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing like a whisper in an empty church. No response came, only the faint sound of the wind outside, rustling the fallen leaves. I made my way to the back of the store, knowing the bathroom was located there. I needed a moment to gather myself, to splash some cold water on my face, to drive away the creeping dread that had settled in my gut. The fluorescent lights buzzed ominously above me, flickering like a heartbeat, quickening each time it dimmed. As I pushed open the bathroom door, I gasped. The mirror was cracked, spider webs lacing across the glass, distorting my reflection into something grotesque. I splashed water on my face, the chill shocking me back to reality, but the cold only seemed to amplify the dread pooling in my stomach. Through the thrum of my heartbeat, I heard it, a low, rhythmic thumping, like someone was tapping against the wall. I turned, pressing my ear to the thin partitions separating the bathroom from the utility room. The sound stopped abruptly, replaced by a heavy silence that felt alive, as if the very air thickened with anticipation. Another tap. I pulled back, heart racing, staring at the door. I had to convince myself it was nothing, a maintenance worker, maybe. I was imagining things. But a gnawing instinct whispered that whatever was behind the door was anything but ordinary. Turning back to the sink, I grabbed a paper towel, wiping my hands, an idle task to distract myself. But the moment I let my gaze wander back to the door, it swung open, slowly and deliberately, revealing an empty room cloaked in shadows. I nearly dropped the towel, heart hammering against my ribcage. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice trembling. No answer came, only the echo of my words bounced back at me. I had a choice. I could run, bolt for my car and escape this place, or I could step forward and confront whatever was lurking behind that door. I chose the latter, though I cursed myself for it. With every step, My breath quickened, a frantic rhythm pounding in my ears. I pushed the door wider, stepping into the utility room, and was met by a wall of stale air. The room was small, poorly lit, cluttered with boxes and old equipment. A flickering fluorescent bulb buzzed overhead, illuminating the space in sickly yellow light. I scanned the room but found it deserted, until my gaze fell on the far corner, where something shifted, a shadow moving against the wall. I squinted, stepping closer, feeling as though a predator lurked just beyond my vision. I peered into the darkness, heart racing, and gasped as a figure emerged, a gaunt man with hollow eyes, dirty clothes clinging to his emaciated frame. "Help me," he rasped, voice scratchy and broken. "Please." I staggered back, my heart pounding wildly. His voice echoed with desperation, but the haunting look in his eyes sent an icy shiver down my spine. This was no ordinary man. The fear lodged itself in my throat, choking me. "Who are you?" I managed, my voice shaking. He took a step forward, his hands trembling. "They're coming for me, for you. You can't stay here." In that instant, the world around me blurred, the gas station and its flickering lights fading into a distant memory. I was frozen by the weight of his words, a tread anchoring me to the spot. The last threads of my resolve unraveled, and I turned, racing back through the bathroom, out into the night. The air outside felt thick, oppressive. I could hear my heart thundering in my chest, each beat echoing the urgency of my escape. I jumped into my car, locking the doors, but as I turned the key in the ignition, the engine sputtered. "Come on," I pleaded, panic rising. I could see shadows moving in my peripheral vision, felt the weight of the night pressing against me. And then, as if in response to my desperation, it roared to life. I peeled out of the parking lot, tires screeching against the asphalt, leaving the gas station and its lingering horrors behind. But as I drove into the night, I could still feel them, the shadows, the whispers, the chill of his warning haunting me. No matter how fast I drove, their presence clung to me like a shroud, a foreboding reminder that I had not escaped at all. I had thought the worst was over, but as the night deepened, a heavy dread settled over me. The gas station loomed ahead, its flickering lights creating an eerie halo against the encroaching darkness. It was strange how a place that had once felt mundane now appeared sinister, shadows morphing into grotesque figures in my mind's eye. I pulled into the gravel lot, gravel crunching beneath the tires like bones underfoot. The station was abandoned, save for a single flickering bulb above the entrance, swinging lightly in the cool breeze as if some unseen hand had left it to sway. My heart beat in time with the flicker, a rhythm of impending doom. I glanced at the clock in my car. It was well past midnight. Pushing open the car door, I was greeted by an unsettling stillness that swallowed any sound I might have made. The air was heavy, saturated with an odor that was both familiar and repugnant, a mixture of gasoline, rubber, and an undercurrent of something rotten. I stepped outside, my breath clouding in front of me like a ghost escaping my lips. The gas pumps stood like sentinels, rusted and covered in layers of dust, their digital displays broken and dark. I moved toward the main building, a small convenience store that had long since seen better days. The glass doors were slightly ajar, creaking ominously as I pushed them open, revealing an interior that was a time capsule of neglect. Shelves lay partially stocked, cans of stale food and faded wrappers cluttering the aisles. I could see the register, untouched, dust gathering like a shroud over it. A soft rustle echoed from the back, freezing my heart. I knew I wasn't alone. "Hello?" I called, my voice cracking. Silence answered, thick and suffocating. The unease danced in the pit of my stomach, urging me to leave, but I needed help. I needed gas, and maybe a flashlight or something to fend off the darkness that seemed to sneak closer with every passing second. Cautiously, I ventured further inside, each step feeling like an intrusion. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow that made every shadow seem alive. I approached the aisle slowly, peering around each corner, half expecting to find someone or something watching me. In the farthest corner, a door led to what I presumed was the stockroom. The soft rustling continued, this time louder, accompanied by a faint thump. My instinct screamed at me to run, but curiosity rooted my feet to the ground. I was drawn to the source of the sound like a moth to flame. I edged closer to the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. It turned easily, and I pushed it open, the hinges protesting with a forlorn creak. A dim light flickered inside, revealing cluttered shelves and cardboard boxes stacked haphazardly. But the room was empty, save for an overturned chair that lay sprawled on the ground, a solitary puddle of dark liquid spreading from where it had toppled. The noise stopped abruptly, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I took a step back, nearly colliding with the door frame when I heard it, a soft, low growl emanating from somewhere behind me. My heart raced as I spun around, my breath quickening. Nothing. Just the dark, oppressive silence. I backed away slowly, trying to calm the rising panic within me, when a figure suddenly emerged from the shadows. A gaunt man, his clothing torn and dirty, stumbled into the light. His eyes were wild, pupils dilated, and he looked at me like a cornered animal. "Help me," he rasped, his voice hoarse and strained. "Please, you have to help me." I hesitated, taking a cautious step back. "What happened? Are you okay?" He shook his head, a violent motion that seemed to send him teetering. "They're coming. You have to hide. You can't let them find you." "Who?" I whispered, fear flooding my veins. His gaze darted around the room, panic rising like a tide. "The ones in the gas. They'll take you, too." I had heard whispers about this place, lore that seeped through the cracks of the town like poison. The gas station, once thriving, had become a graveyard of lost souls, tales of torment and affliction whispered amongst locals who claimed it was haunted. "Please, you have to listen." He staggered closer, but I recoiled instinctively. "They've been watching, waiting for someone to come." I felt my pulse quicken, the sense of dread bubbling up inside me like a boiling pot. "What do you mean? Who's watching?" But before he could answer, a distant sound broke through the silence, a low rumble, the unmistakable sound of a vehicle. The man's face paled, eyes wide with terror. "They're here," he shouted, the raw urgency of his voice piercing the air. I turned, heart racing, and ran back toward the main room. The growl from earlier echoed in my mind, growing closer. The shadows seemed to writhe and twist around me, a dark tide threatening to pull me under. The flickering lights overhead began to falter, plunging the room into deeper darkness, and suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I slammed my shoulder against it, panic clawing at my throat. Something thudded against the door from the outside, a heavy thump that reverberated through my bones. I was trapped, the darkness closing in like a vice. A soft whisper curled around me then, low and unintelligible. My heart raced as I pressed my ear against the door, straining to hear beyond the chaos in my mind. The man's warning echoed in my ears, but there was no time to think. They were coming for me, and I needed to escape. The only way out was back through the stockroom. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and turned away from the door, plunging into the darkness.